There was a live broadcast in the demon meeting room, broadcasting interviews with 4 celestial monarchs, one of them pointing his finger at the hooded guy, calling him the weakest of the celestial monarchs. The guy who had been standing relaxedly on the sidelines before was unpleasantly surprised by his friend's words. For that day, he had become known as the weakest. Even so, he, the weakest of the heavenly monarchs, had become a master of heroes and saints. The monarchs were actually childhood friends. Back when they were neighbors, friends always got together. And if they had been assigned to the same army division, the lad was sure they would have gotten the highest ranks in a very short time. But they had become heavenly monarchs, bound by fate. But everything had changed. Vognis, the stunning tsunami, Brizel, the fierce flame, and Ruviana, the blinding mist, loomed fearfully from their thrones over Capsodia, the celestial scorpion. The guy was very surprised at the news of being dismissed from the 4 celestial monarchs. He didn't understand why his friends were doing this to him. Brizel gloatingly called him the weakest of them all. At first, Capsodia looked at Brizel perplexed, but he suddenly remembered that a month ago, when they were at the Demon King Army's press conference, they had a problem. The journalist had learned which of the monarchs was the strongest and now decided to ask who was the weakest. The journalist had found out who the strongest monarchs were and now decided to ask who was the weakest. But to the great surprise of the guy Brizel and Vognis together pointed at him, this statement made a fuss among the demons. Because of this, rumors began to spread about Capsodia. At first, the hero did not take everything seriously, but the friends were determined. Brizel looked at Capsodia with disgust. He was afraid that if they were considered weak, it would affect the reputation of the Demon King's army. The hooded boy was angry, because all the talk about his abilities was because of Brizel, but his friend had already made up his mind and wasn't going to listen to Capsodium's screams, so he shot into the ceiling of the hall where they were sitting. Everyone flinched in surprise. Then Brizel's cold voice rang out. He said that Capsodium's resignation had already been decided, so he ordered them to pack their things and leave. Brizel went to leave the hall, Vognis stretching himself and lazily noting that while they had long ago gotten the 100th level, he still had the same level, so he wasn't sorry they were getting rid of him. Ruviana wanted to intervene in the conversation. She was going to remind about some attribute of Capsodium, but Vognis didn't want to listen to her. The guy was really only a level 1. He couldn't create shiny things like the one Brizel fired, so he couldn't impress the Demon King, so he'd never get his own territory. Ruviana clenched her fists and asked disappointedly. Capsodia pretended not to hear what the girl said. Ruviana didn't repeat what she said. She just sent a quick hurry to get him out of their place. Then, the guy grabbed the girl's arm and brought it over her head, pinning her against the wall. There was a small altercation that looked little like a real fight. The girl was quiet for a bit and apologized, but there was nothing she could do. Capsodia stroked her head, smiled, and thanked her friend. Thus, Capsodia, the deadly scorpion, left the city of the king and the demons. The boy wandered dejectedly through the forest, thinking that if he returned to his native village, all that awaited him there was only work in the fields, and the opinion of people also bothered him. Capsodia was already approaching the house. He had ordered his thoughts not to think so hopelessly, so he was glad at least that he could rest this night with the Cerberus. Suddenly, when the hero was already near his house, it caught fire. The guy fell to his knees, not realizing what was happening. A huge, terrifying creature that looked like a crocodile and a dragon appeared in front of him. He was the one who destroyed the house of Capsodia. Rumors had also reached him that the guy in front of him was the weakest of the monarchs. The creature smiled gloatingly, making flames come out of its mouth. Capsodia sat sadly on his knees with his head bowed down. The boy questioned whether the creature had set his house on fire, but the dragon didn't want to answer, and only said fearfully that he was one of Brizel's subordinates. His name was Bastron, blazing destruction, but Capsodia cared little for that. He demanded an answer to his question. But Bastron asked him to relax, and in general, he didn't understand how a man with such a bad temper got into the heavenly monarchs, but still the dragon replied that he did burn down the house. Afterward, Bastron, opening his mouth, from which flames were issuing with blinding light, told him that when he had killed him, Brizel had promised to appoint him one of the 4 heavenly monarchs. Capsodia wasn't surprised. He got to his feet, pointing a finger at Bastron, saying aloofly that he could try and die. Nothing followed after that. At first, the dragon tensed up, but afterward he laughed. In a fit of laughter, he said the guy needed to plan his threats better. And actually, he didn't know what he meant by try and die, but he promised that of the two of them, it was Capsodium who would die. Suddenly, the dragon's eyes bulged terribly, as if from a strong, sharp pain. He twisted in half and all blackened, wheezing. From his mouth streamed thick black blood. Bastron did not even understand what happened. He was sure that Capsodia was the weakest of all, and posed no threat to him. But he didn't know that each of the monarchs had their own element. Brazel's attribute was fire, Vognus's was water, Ruviana's was wind, and Capsodia's was death itself. The boy sighed tiredly, wondering aloud unhappily what Brazel was only teaching his subordinates. Capsodia was depressed that he now had no job, no home, and no loyal dog. But no sooner had he sobbed than he heard a barking sound behind him. Capsodia turned joyfully at the sound. In front of him stood his favorite Cerberus, a cute dog with 3 heads. Capsodia rushed to his pet with a hug. He was very glad that Cerberus had been saved. The dog had most likely been able to escape from the house before it was burned. After the happy reunion, the hero sadly told his friend that he was no longer one of the 4 celestial monarchs and warned that these guys would now be after him. So when they can get to him, he has no right to put Cerberus in danger. The doggy sadly yapped. Capsodia snuggled into Cerberus's fluffy and soft fur, asking him to choose either he would be with him despite the danger, or choose to live with Ruviana, the only safe place. The hero, remembering their parting, thought he could trust her. No sooner had Capsodia finished her next thought than Cerberus suddenly ran away with a loud bark. The boy stood shocked with an outstretched hand to the dog, but the pet was already gone. He rushed towards Ruviana's house. Then Capsodia mentally wished Cerberus well to get to the girl. The hero sat leaning against a rock. He was in the middle, somewhere between human territory and demon territory. He wasn't sure why, but he kept walking towards the land of humans. Capsodia was completely unsure of what to do. He definitely didn't know if he could hide among humans all the time. His ancestors from the 10th generation onwards were human-like. He himself had become half person, half human, and half dead. But now that he was being pursued, it might be safe in human territory. So Capsodia was determined to go to human land. Before he could fully relax, something landed on him from above. He wasn't surprised, just another rat. The creature looked like a huge human giant. One eye was missing, and the whites of the other eye were completely black. The creature threw a huge, for the size of Capsodium, sword behind its back. The monster thought the guy was from the heroine's company, but Capsodia didn't understand what he was talking about, so he didn't answer anything. The giant decided to warn the hero that he had run into some girl before. Therefore, he immediately told Capsodium that if he came to kill him, he had better just surrender right away, because he was invincible, because the monster had 8 lives. The hero glared at him and realized that his soul could stockpile human souls, and most likely had a Souls of Many Deaths spell for that purpose. This spell was a death elemental that allowed for the taking of human souls. The process felt just as it was called. So painful, it felt like you were dying. Capsodia asked who he was. It was surprising to the monster, but he decided it didn't matter anymore. Since the guy knew his secret, he couldn't let him get away alive. His already wild and crazy eyes became even crazier. His name was Vazag, the Mad Death, and most of all he loved the silver-haired Lolas. Capsodia did not know how to react to such statements, but the giant was not the least bit embarrassed. He brought his sword above his head and was about to finish off the hero, but the guy pointed his finger at him and said, "Try and die." Vazag suffered the same fate as Bastron, dying. The giant had time to marvel that Capsodia had killed all 8 of his souls. The monster was already dead, but the guy answered his question that even though he had many lives, an instant kill was still an instant kill. Mentally, Capsodia wished Vazag rest in peace. Afterward, he rummaged through his belongings. The giant's bag contained some money and medicine. True, the hero didn't know how valuable the human money was, but he was broke now anyway, so he took it. The guy started to look further to see what the giant had interesting with him. Capsodium's gaze fell on Vazag's huge sword. The boy risked taking it. The sword was very heavy, but he still tried to stuff it into his magical traveler's bag anyway, lamenting that it just couldn't be used, so he figured this guy lived somewhere nearby. Suddenly, Capsodia heard someone's voice, and followed by the smell of another corpse. He covered his nose and thought that it looked like the next one was close, so he had no choice. The hero took out a death notebook. Inside the notebook was written down all the information about the dead. Remembering the name of the giant, he quickly found it in the notebook, as the guy thought Wazag really lived nearby. That meant there could be something else in this place. Capsodia walked out to the cave. In it, he found the girl. Her arms were raised above her head, encased in handcuffs. This was the place where Wazag kept his captives, and the girl was just the silver-haired loli the giant had spoken of. When the girl saw the hero, her eyes opened with terror and fear. Capsodia noticed this and asked her not to be afraid of him. After all, he is not Wazag. The guy asked her about the heroine. The captive became even more upset, her eyes filled with tears. Sadly, she told Capsodia that the heroine, while rescuing her, had died. The guy squatted down in front of the girl. Slanting his head sideways, he saw the body of the heroine. The girl looked like a beast man, and judging by the ears and tail, the hero determined that she was from the family of purple wolves. Capsodia walked over to her and touched her. The girl was still warm. He asked the captive what the heroine's name was. The silver-haired loli replied that the heroine's name was Mrs. Primil Pafimia. The girl didn't understand why he needed this information and wondered what he was doing. The guy was looking in a notebook for information about the murdered woman. Primil had been killed an hour ago. She had been defeated with a single blow from the dragon-tooth sword. Capsody did something with a pen in a notebook, and the heroine began to breathe again. The guy resurrected the girl. The heroine came to her senses abruptly and started coughing convulsively. The captive watched them in amazement and did not understand how such a thing was possible. She thought it was a spell to revive the dead, but such a skill couldn't even be used by a high-level priest, even if he gathered 100 people. Much less do it without an altar, and relics was impossible. The girl, looking at the hero, did not understand who this unknown person was. The captive asked Capsodius how he was able to use the magic of resurrection without sacred relics and other things. The hero faltered a bit. He only now remembered that resurrection magic had been banned in human territory until now for ethical reasons and such. Capsodium used to bring back 1,000 demons a day because the demon people had a bad birth rate, so he was tasked with reviving fallen warriors every day. This annoyed the guy. He recycled time after time while never being able to take part in a battle. Because of this, he had no combat experience, and that was why he still had level 1. He had worked so hard, and in the end he did get displaced. Capsodia had gone a bit out of his way. The girl was already starting to worry, but the guy was quick to say that she was just lucky her body hadn't started decomposing. Then the captive tearfully thanked Capsodia, calling him a saint. The hero was very surprised to be thanked for someone's resurrection. He liked it, so in his thoughts he sent the heavenly monarchs. But suddenly he was interrupted by Pafimia's heartbreaking scream. Her wound was still not healed, so the girl was in pain. Capsodia had completely forgotten that he couldn't conduct a full recovery, but then the captive girl caught on. She asked the guy to free her. As soon as the girl was free, she rushed to help her mistress. The silver-haired girl used a spell and healed the heroine's huge wound. Capsodia watched her in surprise, for it was a God's breath spell that only high-ranking priests were capable of. The heroine joyfully threw herself into her savior's arms. She thanked Sharon. Pafimia tearfully apologized to the saint for dragging her into this nightmare. She realized she was still too weak. The savior was glad that the lady was all right. The most important thing for her was that Pafimia was alive, and replied that it was a test sent down by God for them. Sharon turned her attention to Capsodius and told Mrs. Pafimia that it was better to direct her gratitude to this saint, for it was he who had brought her back to life. The heroine turned toward the boy in surprise. The girls introduced themselves to the hero. Sharon Strong was a servant of God, and Pafimia Primil was of the Purple Wolves, hailing from the southern mountains. The heroine began to praise her assistant. Sharon was incredible, for the people called her the prophet of the Holy Maiden. Capsodia was unpleasantly surprised by this news. In front of him was the most famous priestess even in the demon lands. Because of her insanely accurate predictions, the army of the Lord of Darkness suffered many defeats. Seeing the famous priestess live, the lad was surprised that she looked very young, and amazed that Sharon had chosen this ball of wool, Pafimia Primil, as her hero. Pafimia excitedly asked the name of her savior. The guy almost said his real name but bit his lip bloody in time. He introduced himself as Kapua. The girls were happy to meet him, unlike the guy himself. He never thought he'd run into a holy prophet and a heroine at the beginning of his new life. After all, he's a demon, so it wasn't a good combination. Capsodia decided to ask them to walk him to town, and then he hoped they would go their separate ways. The boy told the girls that they should leave the place as soon as possible. Paphimia agreed. She was still waiting for Vazog to return, but Capsodia stopped her, saying it wasn't necessary, and took out a huge monster sword from his magic pouch. Sharon and Paphimia were in a huge shock. The guy told them that he had finished off the giant. Primel was even more shocked because Vazog was 110th level, so she thought the hero was very strong. Sharon asked Capsodium what level he was. The guy replied that he was level 1. There was a deafening silence. Paphimia slapped the guy hard in a friendly manner and exclaimed loudly that the hero was a joker. Sharon stepped closer to Capsodium. Apologizing, she scanned the guy's magic. She was wildly surprised when it was confirmed that he did indeed have level 1. The girl paled and trembled. Paphimia was eager to know how the hero had defeated Vazog after all. Sharon preceded the lad and admiringly suggested that he was an incredible master strategist, transfixed by the experience of many battles. Capsodia was puzzled. To the girl, it was the only explanation she could come up with. She was sure the guy had employed some tactic to defeat Wazag. But it was illogical, after all. If he had a lot of experience, he wouldn't still be level 1. But the girls didn't care about that. Paphimia was extremely excited. Primel exhaled quietly and turned to Capsodia suspiciously calmly. But you could tell by the look in her eyes that the girl was already plotting something. The hero noticed it immediately, and he really didn't like where this was going. But Paphimia was unstoppable. She happily pounced on a disgruntled Capsodius. Sharon laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. Thus, Capsodia's new life in human territory began with the worst possible confrontation with the heroine and the holy priestess. The border town of Neville lived its measured life. Children running after each other, girls gossiping away, looking at the people of the town. Capsodia thought this place was perfect for his new life. Only one thing bothered him. Sharon and Paphimia were following him. Primel had a dead grip on the boy and kept begging him to take him on as an apprentice. The hero answered her that he was still learning, so he couldn't take on apprentices. Capsodia good-naturedly turned to them and said that their paths diverged. He thanked them for walking him to the city, but the girl did not want to let him go and began to twirl, resembling Cerberus. Because of this, the guy hovered. Paphimia suggested they go to the guild together. After all, Capsodia would still go first to look for a job in the city. The guy didn't know about the guild. The girls explained to him that this was a place to offer and get jobs, and 2 of them needed to register as adventurers. Capsodia was very happy about it, so he immediately agreed to go to the guild. He asked if they wanted to kill the demon lord. Sharon replied that they had planned to do so, but Paphimia realized in the battle with Vazog that she lacked combat experience. The girl made a sad face and said that if she attacked the demon lord's army, she would hardly be able to defeat the strong demons. The hero remained silent because the heroine was right. From his point of view, Paphimia's potential was completely beyond logic, but somehow the girl was severely lacking in practice. Sharon said they decided that Paphimia needed to gain experience first, doing monster-slaying missions and collecting their body parts as proof of a job well done. They believed that was how she would gain experience. But Primel, happily throwing her hand up in the air, told Sharon that their best option was to become an apprentice. The boy quickly covered her mouth. Capsodia was fine with traveling together as long as they would be working in the guild. Paphimia happily threw herself around the guy's neck. She was happy that she would be working together with the master. The hero was uncomfortable that the girl was so close to him. Sharon led them to the guild. Primel cheered loudly. Finally, the boys found the guild and went inside. The room was full of adventurers. The girl behind the counter greeted the new arrivals. Capsodia looked around the room with curiosity. He had once performed reconnaissance missions in human territory, but this was his first time here. The guy first leaned on the desk where the receptionist was and said he was currently looking for a job. Paphimia was surprised that the foreman wasn't adventurous either. Capsodia had killed a huge number of people, but right now he wanted to end this bloody lifestyle, so he wanted to work where he wouldn't be dictated to. The girl asked him for his name. Capsodia again almost gave his real name. Quickly biting his tongue, he called out the name he had told the girls earlier, Kapua, with no last name. After the receptionist asked about his grades, the guy didn't understand what she meant. Then the girl asked about his qualifications. The guy again remained silent. The administrator asked what unions he was currently in, and if he had letters of recommendation he could hand them over, but the hero had none of that. For all intents and purposes, the guy failed the interview, so the girl had no suitable job for him. The hero sadly asked that there was no job at all for him. Then the receptionist replied that there was one job after all. She held a cat ad in one hand and kitty food in the other. There was only one job for Capsodia, cat feeder. The hero asked how much he would be paid for it. The girl cheered the guy up a bit by saying that the benefit from the cats would be much more than he thought. In his mind, Capsodia was glad to hear that. But the girl also warned him that he could always become adventurous by taking a simple test, and promised that if the guy could increase his rank, living in the mansion would be an attainable goal. Capsodia glanced at the girls who were happily and contentedly waiting off to the side. Reluctantly, he had agreed to be an adventurer after all, which made Sharon and Euphemia turn to each other happily. Euphemia was the most excited about the news that she would be able to travel with Capsodium. She hung on to her master again, the guy irritably asking her not to be sticky with him in public. In his mind, he thought that he would have to plan his work to avoid the girls. The receptionist behind the counter pulled out a pillow ball and said they were going to see if he had the qualities to be an adventurer. The orb was placed in front of Capsodium. The girl warned that he shouldn't dwell on it because all he needed to do was just touch this magical device. Capsodia looked at the orb, a little nervous. This was a bad idea for him, because if his magic was determined to be high-rank magic, he would be exposed as a demon. Euphemia was the first to volunteer to go through this text. The guy was glad of that because he could see firsthand what level of technology this device was. The administrator had time to ask the girl that she too wanted to become an adventurer. Euphemia replied positively and touched the magic ball. Everything around her lit up with a bright white light. Everyone was surprised. It was a noble white color. One of the adventurers had never seen anything like it before. The result of Euphemia was amazing, because the people about whom this device spoke so well later became heroes and accomplished many great feats. In other words, it was the best result. Sharon was amazed to the point of tears. The other adventurers in the guild decided to commemorate the event. Euphemia joyfully jumped on Sharon and told her that her prophecy had come true after all. The administrator, upon hearing Saint Sharon's name, was surprised that they had a famous priestess in their guild. Sharon, smiling sweetly, introduced Euphemia and said that this girl was chosen by her to be a hero. All the people in the guild apologized for being rude, but the girls also apologized for startling them. Sharon explained that since Euphemia still had no combat experience, they thought she should gain experience by working as an adventurer. Primmel snickered a bit, so she asked to finally evaluate the master already. The receptionist was surprised that the heroine called the guy a mastermind and asked Capsodium about it, but the hero quickly interrupted her, saying that Euphemia had just blabbed too much. Bringing his hand closer to the balloon, the guy hoped everything would be all right. When he finally touched, the room lit up even more with a blinding light that some covered their face. The girls were amazed that it was a divine light. To Euphemia, it was amazing. It was what she expected from a master. Capsodia nervously thought that this wasn't happening at all like Euphemia. The orb on his magic said he was just a devil. The guy stared fearfully at the magical paraphernalia. Everyone was in a huge shock, especially the administrator, because the orb gave out a new phrase. Everyone cheered delightedly. Some had been in the guild for 10 years but had never heard such phrases. Euphemia was even more thrilled and delighted, another thing she had not expected from the master. Sharon asked confusedly how he was able to utter the new phrase and suggested that he was their savior sent by God. It was the day when the history of this guild changed. A powerful old man showed up amongst all the adventurers. He stood and looked at Capsodium, who had already been completely climbed on by Euphemia. That huge old man was Mackenzie Sama. He was a former silver adventurer and is a guild master. The man walked closer. His attention was drawn to the girls, and especially anything below their faces. Looking at Euphemia, he noticed her beautiful body proportions. He had been told about Sharon that she was the one who had chosen Primmel. Then he turned his attention to the holy priestess. Mackenzie blushed and shook his head in different directions. He was delighted at how beautiful and sweet they were. Capsodia couldn't understand what was wrong with this old man. The receptionist angrily called the grandfather's attention to the guy, but Mackenzie glared angrily at him and said that this guy was worthless. The hero was outraged by his words. The old man said that the hero's face didn't give him the feeling that he was strong. His eyes looked lifeless, and his body looked like it would fly away if he breathed in his direction. With each new remark, Capsodius's face puffed up more and more with indignation, and the fact that his eyes looked lifeless was not his fault, for he was a half-person, but the old man did not know that, of course. The grandfather cut to the chase and said he had been in the guild for about 40 years, but he had not heard that phrase. Mackenzie speculated many possibilities as to why the orb said that, but the last thought was voiced glumly, assuming that the guy was indeed a cursed being, such as a member of a race of demons. Capsodia tensed up not for a joke, for the grandfather had almost revealed his identity, but in the next second the grandfather good-naturedly said that it was a joke. Then the hero exhaled a little. Pulling his hood lower, Capsodia wanted to finish registering as soon as possible and get the hell out of this place. Suddenly, the guy heard the sound of a fly. But the grandfather was not going to just let the hero go. He was going to find out the essence of the guy by fighting him. Sharon was surprised. Mackenzie apologized to her, but explained that as the man in charge of the guild, it was his duty to check if the man was evil or not. Besides, Capsodia was already in the rack. He didn't mind fighting. Paphemia was impressed by the master's bloodthirstiness. Capsodia was very serious about the fight. Some guys in the guild were sure the hero would be crushed by Mackenzie. The fly was still buzzing beside the hero. Halflings and flies were inextricably linked because halflings were a race of half-dead demons. They always smelled a bit of corpse, though the odor was so faint that the beastman couldn't smell it. Capsodia lost sight of the fly. He decided to end their bond right here and now. The fly sat on Mackenzie, himself already prepared to attack. The guy yelled for the old man to stay still and stand still, but he didn't listen and swung around to strike. Then Capsodia smacked his grandfather in the forehead with all his might, right on the fly. This left Mackenzie with his head pressed into the floor, only his feet peeking out. Everyone was in huge shock. To the other adventurers, what happened was madness, for Capsodia had put down the guild head with a single blow. Paphemia was stuck to the guy again. She was enamored of him. The hero looked at his palm. Instead of a fly, he saw a small abrasion. Apparently, it had come out when he sent his grandfather's head into the floor. The guy grimaced and said he would go already. Mackenzie was still upside down, muffledly asked who he was. Capsodia turned to him and perplexedly asked why he was hiding. The grandfather indignantly replied that he was the reason he was here. The hero reflected on his essence. Since he was half dead, he could harness power beyond human capabilities. And while he was possessed by this fly, then accidentally removed the restriction of his power, the hero held out his hand, asking if he was all right. The old man irritably asked why bother with him. In fact, his grandfather admitted that he underestimated his capabilities and said that Capsodia passed his test. The receptionist crouched down next to Mackenzie's feet and asked if he was all right. The old man admitted that such a blow had made his whole life fly before his eyes. Paphemia was still in no way relenting. She had gotten too close to the master, but she wasn't embarrassed in any way. She was thrilled that now they could be adventurers together. Sharon approached the boy and congratulated him on his successful entry into the adventurers. The hero noticed that the priestess's hands were trembling a little. He apologized for scaring her, but the girl said she was just worried about him. Capsodia stroked her head and said she was a good person. The holy priestess was embarrassed by the master's words. Mackenzie tossed Capsodia his badge and told him to take it and get lost. After all, he deserved it. The guild administrator found out that it was a silver adventurer badge. Everyone was surprised that the newcomer was already a silver adventurer. The hero wasn't happy with it because it would stand out if he took it, so he threw it away, called it weird stuff, and said he didn't need it. There was a furious shout from Mackenzie, threatening to snap Capsodia's head off if he didn't go silver rank. He didn't want to take the silver rank from Mackenzie. He planned to start with the iron rank and then see what to do next. He wasn't ready to be a high-ranked adventurer yet. He was only level 1. Mackenzie was very surprised by such a statement. Sharon immediately confirmed it. After all, she had tested him herself. The guy said he was just lucky, the old man thought. A happy Paphemia appeared from behind. She was fine with being an iron-ranked adventurer, but she had already been assigned a bronze-ranked one. But the girl wanted to be like her iron-rank master. The hero turned to her and took her by the shoulders. He said she would be bronze, for she needed training now. The heroine was very upset. The guy turned his back on her and told her that if he was going to help her all the time, she would never learn anything, and if she still wanted to travel with him, she needed to pump herself up to his level. The girl burst into tears and threw herself into the master's arms again. She promised him to try harder. Capsodia hugged Paphemia back, but couldn't help but be glad that things were going as he had planned. Paphemia's potential was at the highest level, and she had already attained heroine status. And once she gained experience, she would be able to reach a rank where she could gain an audience with the king. With parades by day and high society events at night, a glamorous life in the royal palace awaited her. Capsodia hoped she would forget about him and planned to live a quiet life where he wasn't exploited. Paphemia stood in front of Sharon and promised her to give her her best. The receptionist intervened in the conversation and told her that there was a quest for her that they wanted her to complete as soon as possible. However, the administrator warned that the task could be very difficult for the heroine because she still did not have enough experience in battles. But Paphemia was not frightened by this. She was already ready to get to work. Capsodia was about to leave, but heard the description of the task. The administrator began to describe Vazag. With each sentence, the guy's eyes became more and more rounded. The girls looked at each other in surprise, and then laughed, and said that Vazag was already deader than all the dead. Everyone was amazed, and Paphemia didn't forget to tell everyone that it was thanks to the master. Everyone stared at the hero. The girl was hovering above the ground. She had just released a mist storm towards her opponent's side. Exhaling tiredly, she looked down and noticed Vognis standing with his army doing nothing. Ruviana shouted at him to hurry up and dispatch the warriors. The demon grinned evilly and sent a tidal wave at the enemies. The girl from on high shouted at him, displeased at what he was doing. Vognis shouted back at her that they just needed to kill more people, but Ruviana wasn't satisfied with that. She hysterically shouted at him to follow the plan. The demon was too confident and asked the girl not to worry, in his opinion, about small things. The main thing for him in the battle was to kill more people. Ruviana screamed hysterically at him. Vognis groaned beneath her and shouted that he understood her. The girl was able to watch everyone from above and could see that the resurrectionists were not doing their job well. Vognis was originally tasked with wreaking havoc on the front lines because, like Ruiana, he was not suited for the job of a leader in the rear. The demoness remembered Capsodium because the guy always thought of clever battle strategies when he was with them. She already wished the hero was with them because no one understood the gravity of the situation like Capsodia, because the hero always came to them with another brilliant strategy the day before every big battle, regardless of his busyness and fatigue. He drew up all the battle plans, negotiated between all the demon races, and he came up with the 4 celestial monarchs, and they were just an addition. Ruviana, unlike the others, realized that without Capsodium, the Demon King's army was completely useless. The girl was so immersed in her thoughts that she didn't notice the magic ball, released by the enemy, flying at her. Vognis called out to the girl, but the ball was already flying straight at her, and Brazel came to her aid in time. He knocked down the enemy's magic ball and landed to his friends. Brazel was displeased with them and asked what was wrong. Vognis was happy to see the demon and happily said he had saved them. But Brazel was cold with him and only told Vognis to go back to the vanguard. The man was confused by this order. The monarch was displeased that Vognis wasn't giving orders, so he was sending him to the vanguard. Then Ruviana asked Brazel who will be in the rear. The demon asked her not to forget that he is the commander-in-chief of the demon army. Therefore, he leaves the command of the army to her. The girl was fine with that, but in turn, asked her not to forget that the Demon King was the supreme commander of them all. Ruviana was perplexed to ask what happened to Brazel's resilience. It was as if he was looking down on the Demon King. She had never said anything like that. But when he mentioned it, the thought made sense to her. Brazel didn't answer anything to that, only snickered crookedly, leaving his friends who were staring at him incomprehensibly without an answer. He turned around to leave. But the girl hurriedly asked where he was going, because there were still enemy troops to be finished off. The demon said that he was returning to the royal city with a report. He had unfinished business there. Ruviana guessed that Brazel was planning to shut himself away in his lab to pursue his little toys. Brazel didn't like the way she spoke of his inventions. The demon looked askance at the demoness and said that when they were completed, she would realize the importance of these toys, for he was sure they would change the outcome of the war. Ruviana looked at Brazel incredulously, turning to her friend Capsodius in her thoughts, asking what they should do next. The morning came. Images of the previous day popped up in Capsodium's mind, and the boy remembered that there was no way he could get away from the adventurers in the guild. He ended up being asked in great detail about the Wazag incident, and since neither of them had any money, they stayed at the same hotel. Capsodia also woke up to the fact that he was being begged to wake up, and suddenly, he found a completely naked Paphimia on top of him. The girl looked sad and called insistently for the master. The guy let it be known that he was already awake, and the heroine immediately thundered at Capsid with tears in her eyes. The heroine was embarrassed and asked what she was doing. Capsodia recoiled fearfully from her, his scream scaring away all the birds outside the window. He didn't understand what had happened during the night to find her like that in the morning. Paphimia had to sleep in a separate room. The girl cried out in tears that she was glad he was back to life. Looking at the heroine, the guy thought she was being too clingy and had already decided that she was trying to be more than just a student to him. Capsodia, stuttering, asked the girl to calm down finally. Paphimia tearfully apologized. After all, she was just worried about him. The guy already understood why and demanded to get off him finally. He was worried that Sharon might see them like this. But suddenly the priestess gave voice. She too was in bed with him, only positioned between his legs and also, like Paphimia, was naked. The holy priestess, to his great surprise, was in tears, and when she saw the boy, she burst into tears. The holy priestess was in tears, and when she saw the boy, she burst into tears. After calming down a bit, as much as possible in such an ambiguous situation, the guy asked what they were doing here. Paphimia tearfully replied that his heart wasn't beating, and Sharon complimented that his body was very cold, so they wanted to warm him with their bodies. Capsodia was a half-person, so his heart didn't beat, and he could move with magic. But this guy couldn't tell the girls, so he was thinking hard how to get out of this situation. The hero noticed from the girls that they had no clue of his nature at all, so he seriously demanded that they get dressed. Sharon and Paphimia quickly ran to get dressed. When everyone was in their clothes, Capsodia told the girls that he was fine. Saint and heroine stared at him in surprise. Then the hero lied to them that it was such a workout. The girls were very delighted and surprised. He had come up with the idea that among the demonic races, there were those who were capable of using death attribute magic. Such magic was extremely dangerous, for just one attribute was enough to kill any opponent regardless of their strength, and warned if such a spell stopped his heart, his body would already know how to restart it. Of course, all this was not true, but the girls believed and were simply delighted with the abilities of the master. The guy mentally thanked them for such gullibility. Paphimia again stuck to him, and the hero thought that he was even ashamed of his lies. Suddenly, Primal jumped up and said that she forgot about baking. The girl was baking bread. Getting dressed, the guy was a little surprised that the heroine could cook. Sharon said that Paphimia helps her a lot around the house. The holy priestess went upstairs to get plates, but accidentally stumbled and could have fallen. But in time, Capsodia caught the girl. Sharon thanked him, picking up a handful of plates, and went to set the table. Paphimia told her that after Sharon had taken the powers of the prophecy saint, she had not left the royal palace, and this might be the first time she had ever gotten out. And in addition, all of the priestess's companions died at the hands of Vazag. Capsodia looked at her and thought that the girl had indeed had a hard life. The bread was ready, the baked goods were placed right in front of the master, and the girls stood at his sides, waiting impatiently for him to taste their creation. When Capsodia tasted the bread, he was delighted at how delicious it was. The girls were delighted with his reaction. Holding the pastries in his hands, the guy thought that it had been a long time since he had eaten a proper meal. Because when he was in demon territory, he couldn't eat properly due to work, so he had to choke on pills. Paphimia told the hero that if he liked it, she could cook such a thing every day. Capsodia was surprised that a girl could cook every day. Embarrassed, he was silent for a while. After a short silence, he asked if they were going to stay at this inn too. The girls replied that they would stay for a while. Capsodia thought he was fine with staying at this inn while he was in town. Euphemia brought some bread for herself as well, and began to eat breakfast as well. Sharon asked Capsodia if he had any plans after that, and told him that he and Euphemia had decided to go to the armory to buy some gear. The guy thought that he could find out how much human currency was worth there, so he nodded in agreement. In the end, they all decided to go to the guild together. The guys were in the armory. They were delighted with the large selection in the store. They were greeted by the salesman, and the girls immediately introduced themselves. The man told them they already knew who they were and beckoned them to come with him. Sharon beckoned to Capsodium too, but the boy refused and said he was just going to look around. The master stayed with the saleswoman. The girl's name was Flema Ketten. She was still in her second year, but she was using the commercial pitch she had mastered during her time in sales. So, in a clothing boutique, no matter the type, all customers went to her, and whoever it was, she would resell them whatever she could. At the moment, she was targeting Capsodia. At her first glance, the guy looked like a beggar, but her gut told her he was saving up money. She knew he was adventurous, and he looked worse than a bum to her, yet she was sure he was saving every penny. So she had already made her sinister plan. She decided to show him this month's recommended magical armor that was perfect for the hero, and while he would buy it, she would swamp him and sell him everything. Capsodia, unsuspecting, was looking at the assortment of the store. There were a lot of different weapons, so he was confused looking at the flower sword. Suddenly, the saleswoman turned to him. Kindly, she asked if she could give him a hint. The hero replied that he didn't need anything. He was just here for company. The girl with an eerily good-natured face began to tell him that they have a huge assortment, and he will definitely look at something. The guy was uncomfortable with her demonic smile, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. He replied that he was just looking at the assortment. But Flema didn't care anymore. She ran off to find something to show the hero, asking what exactly he was looking for along the way. Capsodia wasn't looking for anything, but decided not to take any chances and replied that he was looking for weapons. In fact, he didn't want to say armor because he would have to undress. Even though Sharon and Euphemia had already seen him, he still didn't want to be naked because the bodies of the halflings were dead and the guy used different magic to move, so depending on the person, some people could feel something. The girl showed him the armor that was now recommended in the store and asked him what he thought of it. Capsodia thought she wasn't listening to him. He didn't answer her, but the salesgirl didn't need his answer. She began to praise the armor, telling him that it was made of mifrin and was capable of increasing his physical defense by an amazing 40 points. The hero did not share her enthusiasm and perplexedly said that this armor raises surprisingly few points. The girl was unpleasantly shocked. Also, Capsodia could tell if it was a mithrin or not just by looking at the thing. The saleswoman shuddered and said that 40 units was quite a lot. The boy replied that for a low level maybe, thinking in his mind that in a demon army they would never wear such armor. Flema Ketten did not give up, and wanted to already say that the armor has not only physical protection, but also magical. But Capsodia beat her to it. The saleswoman was amazed and asked how he knew. But the name of the armor already had the answer in it, and the hero thought Flema thought he was a fool for not knowing about such things. Stammering, the girl agreed with him and continued that this armor still gives extra. The guy for her suggested that the armor gives 300 points, but the girl confusedly named 30 points. But then she changed her mind and lied that it was still 300. She also unexpectedly added that it was the real McCoy, but Capsodia said it was just a pile of useless junk, because his robe had a magical defense of around 500 points. Flema was completely lost. The guy noticed she had gone pale, but the saleswoman told him to ignore her. The girl was clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't back down and tried to get Capsodius to try it on once, because he would look more stylish than he did now. The guy was starting to get annoyed by her insistence. He didn't understand why she was so vehemently forcing him to try on the armor. Capsodia thought sharply that maybe she knew him, and as Flema began to praise the look of the armor, the guy pinned the girl against the wall and loomed menacingly over her. He angrily asked her if she knew who he was. Of course, Flema didn't know, and was frightened to ask what he meant. Then the hero frantically shouted at her not to play dumb. He thought she was an ordinary salesman, but she turned out to be extraordinary. The girl thought he was complimenting her. She thought of something else. The saleswoman in the store was called an ace. She thought he guessed that she was a professional saleswoman. There was a misunderstanding. The hero was 100% sure that Flema was trying to talk Flema into trying on the armor to test the body. The girl grabbed the guy's robe and demanded to take it off, but Capsodia irritably refused her. The saleswoman started to get angry that the guy didn't believe her, the professional of this store. The hero called her crazy, and so he refused to take off his robe. Finally, the other salesman and the girls returned and shouted menacingly what they had done. The salesgirl had already grabbed the boy firmly by the robe and threw him to the floor. She asked the manager to listen to her. She wasn't happy that Capsodia refused to measure the armor for her. The hero yelled in a rage that she was trying to take his mantle off him, and since he was her boss, he should do something about it. Flema didn't like what he said about her forcing him. After all, she is the ace of this store. The girl winced, and her manager grabbed her by the scruff of the neck, lifting her off the floor. The man in charge apologized to Capsodia, turning to Flema and saying she was fired. The saleswoman was amazed. She asked her boss if he was sure, because without her, the ace of the store, the gun store would close quickly. But the manager did not coddle Flema and told her head-on that she had never been an ace. The saleswoman was indignant, for he himself had called her so. The chief replied that it was when they were alone. But since she had come here, she had behaved very impertinently and had not sold a single thing properly. Capsodia, listening to them, realized what the girl was talking about when she called herself an ace. The boss had expressed to the saleswoman that he had tolerated her for 2 years because a friend introduced her. But now, after he paid her today, she would be fired. The manager apologized to the guy and asked him to accept the gift as a sign of apology. The hero realized what a misunderstanding had occurred, but accepted the gift, and thought that maybe he should have tried on the armor. The hero walking up to a saddened Flema and cheered her up by telling her that he too had recently been laid off. So he understood her, but it was just a gun store, not her whole life. Euphemia called out to the master and asked how she looked. She was in her new gear. Capsodia said her new gear looked good, except for the bell around her neck. Sharon appreciated it too. The guys were fully prepared and decided to go on the mission. The task was divided into 3 categories. The first one was extermination tasks. Most of them were monster extermination missions. The second category was collection tasks, involved collecting various herbs, resources, materials, and valuables from dungeons. The last category of this task was helping. This included tasks for harvesting crops, cutting trees, and so on. The administrator said that since they were Iron Rank adventurers, they could choose an assignment from any category. Euphemia was happy about this news and chose the extermination assignment. The girl took the assignment sheet and showed it to Sharon. The latter whispered something to the heroine and she agreed to the task. Capsodia decided to take the collection task, but Euphemia immediately approached him. She was clearly unhappy with the master's choice. The guy told her he was done with monster hunting. The hero turned on mentor mode and told Euphemia that if they hunted in the same area, it would stop her development. In fact, Capsodia didn't want to go because demons could tame monsters. There were even demons that could see through the eyes of tamed monsters. So there was no way he wanted to go where he could meet them. The administrator offered to take the master to task for gathering magical herbs. Capsodia, shoving Euphemia away from her, agreed to it. The girl in the guild hurriedly warned Capsodius that if he encountered monsters while doing a task, he could not worry and return home. Though again warned that they couldn't compensate him for any injuries he might suffer, but they could buy back their corpses at market price. Capsodia smelled a catch. Euphemia and Sharon wandered through the forest looking for the monster. They were looking for the wolf of Gov. The saint asked how strong he was. The heroine asked her not to worry and promised she had her back. Sharon, hands showing the barrier, said that she could create a protective barrier if needed. Euphemia cheerfully commented that they together were comparable in strength to 100 people. Suddenly their monster appeared from the back. The girl swung her sword at him, but the wolf deftly dodged. He said her attacks were strong, but she was still very slow and inexperienced, and urged her to fight harder. The heroine struck blow after blow, but never once hitting the monster. In another such a strong swing, sword jumped out of the girl's hand and flew into the bushes, dodging the blows of Euphemia Wolf exhausted. He flew off the heroine and said he was leaving. Primal wasn't going to just let him go, but the huge wolf yelled, "No wait, no stop, no repeat." The wolf didn't understand what was wrong with this belligerent girl. She was really wearing him out. But then he saw Capsodius on the road, who was gathering magical herbs. The monster looked at him and thought he'd seen him somewhere before, but then he remembered and couldn't believe his eyes. Meanwhile, the hero had finally found Ruruiru's herb and was very happy about it. He was happy he had taken the gathering task because the forest was very quiet. True, if it wasn't for the girls, it would have been even better. But still, he was also happy that he could find some food here. But suddenly, Capsodia heard a growl at his back and tiredly thought that the end of his rest had come. Wolf knew the weakest of the monarchs sat before him. The monster's name was Wolf Taro. Brazel had bestowed that name upon him. He was a servant of hell and loved NTR. Wolf Taro couldn't believe his eyes that the exile of the Demon King's army was now sitting in front of him in demon territory. He promised to bite his head off and hand it to Brazel. The boy quickly directed his magic at him. The wolf had foam dripping from its mouth. It was dead. Capsodia hoped he had killed him before he reported him, and then noticed that the quality of the magic grass had started to drop due to it drying up. And then he looked at the wolf again and remembered that the guild had mentioned that they would be willing to buy at market price for the bodies. He figured that Wolf Taro would cover his expenses and took it with him, but as it turned out, he would regret his decision later on. Capsodia brought the herb and got 7,000 perukas for it. That would be enough for a week at the inn. He remembered that when he served in the demon army, his pay was 1 dry frog, so it was a lot for him. The hero asked where Paphemia and Sharon were. The receptionist wanted to reply that they hadn't returned yet, but an exhausted heroine showed up at the guild door. She was all shivering and distressed. Looking at them, the boy assumed that things had ended badly. Paphemia told him that the monsters had run away from them. She complained that they were nimble and told them it was a ruthless wolf with a scar between its eyes. Capsodia realized from the description that it was Gav. The girls were surprised. Then the hero told them that the wolf had attacked him while he was gathering magical herbs, so he had no choice but to kill it, and pointed at Wolf Taro's body. Everyone was just now noticing the dead Gav and was stunned. The boy didn't understand their mood, and already thought that the monster should have been captured alive. But the receptionist suddenly shouted that it was unbelievable. It was amazing that he brought the body without cuts, without bloodstains. The girl thought he used poison, but Capsodia. The administrator told her that it would be great for science, and nearby lab museums would start trying to buy it back. She told Capsodium that they could offer over 1 million perukas. Such a price made the guy out of shock. True, the receptionist said he would become famous, and he didn't need that, because famous people always stood out. And if that happened to him, everyone would know he was a demon. The receptionist rushed to contact the curator right away, but the guy stopped her and said that since this Gav was really of great value, he was willing to donate it for free. Paphemia intervened and said he could become rich. Capsodia replied through force that the advancement of science was more important than the reward. Everyone was delighted by the hero's generosity. The heroine promised she would never forget those words. Capsodia questioned the adequacy of these people, but either way, he was fine with it, as long as it was okay. Capsodia took his reward for the magic herb and said they could take care of everything themselves. The hero was still invited to the opening of the museum. A small museum was named in his honor, and everyone began to pay a lot of attention to him. The guy began to stand out very much. Capsodia, covering himself more tightly with his hood, was a little glad the girls weren't around because their assignment was quite far away. The boy was tired and had come to the guild to rest. But once inside, there was no way he expected to meet the girls so soon. Sharon and Paphemia were sitting on the floor. The heroine was injured. Getting closer to them, Capsodia asked what happened to them. Saint and Primal were attacked by a monster. They said that recently there were a lot of monsters breeding in the nearby forest. The administrator told her that simple adventurers were too weak, so she asked Paphemia to help, but the girl soul too focused on protecting Sharon. Paphemia must have gained a lot of combat experience recently, so the guy thought that meant these monsters were quite unpleasant. Capsodia thoughtfully asked if the monster had any features. The receptionist said that the monster had bared fangs, red eyes, and 3 heads. The guy's favorite pet, Cerberus, fit that description perfectly, and he glowed at the guess. It had to be, because all the characteristics matched. Capsodia decided that the dog missed him, so he agreed to do this task. But everyone was a little surprised, because he himself had said that he would not fight anymore. But the master said it was a special case. Euphemia already wanted to ask to go with him to fight the monster, but the hero rubbed her head and said she needed to heal her wounds, so he asked her to take the day off. The heroine wouldn't back down. She really wanted to see him fight. But the guy couldn't let her see his relationship with Cerberus, so he told her that he was too strong and could hurt her, so he should go alone. But the girl in no way wanted to get behind Capsodium. But to the guy's delight, Mackenzie came up to them and told the girl that the guy was telling her in direct text that he couldn't win, covering for her. Mentally, the hero thanked his grandfather. Only then did Euphemia sadly agree with the master and wished him luck. Sharon also wished him luck, and the lad reassured everyone by saying that since the goddess of victory was praying, he would surely return. Everyone shouted approvingly after him, and Capsodia was happy to meet his favorite Cerberus. Brizzell, Vognus, and Ruviana were sitting at the conference table. The first to get up from the table was the girl and said she was leaving. Brizzell stopped the demoness. The demon moved close to her ear and asked if she was free tonight, for he had found a bar that served excellent dragon sake. Brizzell had invited the girl to go there. Ruviana waved him off and said that she already had plans for this evening, but the demon wasn't satisfied with that because the girl had turned him down last time for the same reason. But the demoness replied that he went into the past too much. Brizzell got angry, and Ruviana told him that she would keep her pet busy today because he hadn't been well lately. The demon was certainly not pleased with the refusal, but somehow smirked oddly and asked if she remembered the purpose of his research, namely the creation of artificial chimeras. Brizzell said he was going to research their cells to create an even more ferocious creature, and as an experiment he had already created one. He should have important data in a few days. He said that if he could create even stronger monsters, his power would be unstoppable. Brizzell grabbed Ruviana's hand and asked her to choose him over Capsodius. He noticed that she had a high opinion of his power, but he was banished and no longer had power. He wanted to say more, but the girl slapped him. Ruviana turned around and left the room. Vognus, who had been watching them until then, was shocked. Brizzell touched his cheek and promised that at the end, absolutely everything would be in his power. Meanwhile, Capsodia wandered through the forest in search of his favorite pestle, picking Cerberus's favorite berries along the way. Suddenly, the guy heard a scream and thought it was his pet. He headed towards the sound, but saw the injured adventurers with a huge dragon with 3 heads looming over him. One of them noticed the hero and forbade him to come close because he was no match for him. But Capsodia was furious and began to shout that how dare this serpent have such an appearance because he had made him worry and it had all turned out to be for nothing. He screamed that there was only room in this world for one 3-headed beast, and that was his Cerberus, because there was nothing better for him than his sweet Cerberus. The hero, without noticing anyone around him, aimed his magic at the 3-headed dragon, and the monster quickly died. The adventurers who were lying there were surprised that Lord Hyder was dead. When they turned to Capsodius, he was gone. The boy was very upset that it wasn't his Cerberus. The dog was sitting in a corner in Ruviana's house, shivering all over. He was sad that it had ended this way. His previous owner, Capsodia, was always laced with complaints he didn't want to hear. His current owner he thought was a good person who laughed and forgave everything he did. But suddenly it changed. The girl appeared in the house and called Cerberus to eat. The dog jumped up with fear. Ruviana lifted him up and noticed that he was dusting. She decided to bathe him. Cerberus was not happy about it and barked. The girl then put him back down and handed him food. It looked very unappetizing. She was going to feed him this unpalatable broth. Ruviana told him that he was very thin. It was not good to overeat, but it was not good to undernourish, and asked him to open his mouth. Capsodius was greeted by a joyful Euphemia. She hugged him tightly, which hurt the guy, and he asked her not to hug like that in front of everyone. But the hero was still sad because he never found his Cerberus. Also, Sharon came out to greet him. He patted the girls on the head. Primal rushed over to ask how it went with the monster. Capsodia defeated it, and everyone was thrilled that he was able to kill the Hydro Lord. The hero was dumbfounded that everyone knew who he was going to and no one told him. Euphemia approached the master and said that she wanted too, like him, to become a heroine who could make everyone happy. The girl could be understood, because lately she was constantly losing. Sharon approached the heroine, taking her hands, told her that she could do anything and believed that she would succeed. The administrator turned to Capsodia and asked if he would have any proof that he had defeated the Hydro Lord, because she wanted to report the quest as completed. But the guy was too angry, so he completely forgot about it and didn't take the dragon's body with him. Then he thought to say that someone else killed him because he didn't want them to build another museum in his honor. One of the adventurers placed a monster horn on the table. Everyone stared at Mr. Mistelton in surprise. He was a silver rank adventurer who was one of the top 10 adventurers of the royal capital. Capsodia began to remember a bit that there was indeed someone else there besides him. The administrator assumed that it was this adventurer who had been able to defeat the Hydra Lord, and that Capsodia had just blatantly lied to them. The guy was satisfied with such a turn because he could live a quiet life. Capsteady waited for Mistelton to say that he had killed the monster. The hero literally begged him in his mind to do it. But Mistelton finally spoke, pointing his finger at Capsodium. The man said that it was the master who had killed him. The boy couldn't believe that this adventurer hadn't taken advantage of the situation. Mistelton approached Capsodium and asked why he didn't take the trophy. He figured the guy had decided to give all the credit to him. Everyone was thrilled with the guy's action. The hero, of course, was not happy that everyone was obsessed with him again. The next day, Sharon nursed the adventurer's wounds. Mistelton came to Capsodium to thank him. He said that he and his partner lived together in the same and burned the village to the ground. This happened 15 years ago. They worked until they were blue in the face to get revenge, but the dragon grew stronger and they couldn't defeat it. So the adventurer was a little upset that he couldn't kill it with his own hands. But he and his partner would remember Capsodium's kindness all their lives. Sharon healed the second adventurer, and Mistelton thanked her, kissing her hand, telling her that her power was the same as he had heard. The adventurer was impressed and promised to repay her someday. The girl was embarrassed. After all, she had only done her job. Next, Mistelton turned his attention to Paphimia. He said he'd heard about her incident with Vazog, in the battle she'd lost to him, and failed to protect Sharon. And lately, she'd been failing constantly. The guy had been pushing the girl's sorest spots. The heroine's face changing more and more with each phrase, Capsodia noticed that Mistelton appeared to be a very straightforward guy. Although it was true, Paphimia's success rate was around 20, she did her best to perform as an iron rank. The girl worked hard. Sharon worriedly replied to him that Paphimia didn't have enough combat experience yet and was trying very hard to accumulate it. But Mistelton wasn't moved by that. He recalled how long it had been since arriving in the city. Saint still wanted to reply, but was stopped by Paphimia. She turned to her and said that she was really bad-tempered, and she really relied heavily on the two of them. Because of that, she was now underprepared. Paphimia Primil turned to Mistelton and unexpectedly asked him to train her. The adventurer grudgingly said that she was mistaken if she thought she could easily become stronger. But the girl replied that she didn't want to be a burden anymore because she was a hero. Mistelton looked at her and agreed. She and her partner needed to stay in the city for a while anyway to recover. Paphimia thanked the adventurer loudly, but he advised her to thank the saint and said he hoped her desire would not diminish. The girl was determined and shouted that she couldn't wait to work with him. To the side, the whole time Capsodia stood by and watched them with a smile. He didn't say another word that day. Paphimia and Mistelton were practicing on the field. The adventurer was yelling that she was very slow and so on. Capsodia was standing off to the side and watching them. It was already day 5 after they started training. Paphimia left the guy and Sharon and practiced until she was exhausted, then fell asleep right in the hero's bed. Sharon was sitting at the guild table, sad in the guild. Capsodia noticed her and called out to her. Guy walked closer to her, putting his hand on her head, noticing that she was worried about Paphimia. The holy priestess was sad. She kept thinking she was pulling the heroine down. She certainly wanted to add to her confidence, but since there was a better way, she would not interfere. Capsodia saw that the priestess was greatly worried and advised her to go check on Primil. Sharon wanted to object, but the guy reminded her that it had been 6 days, so he figured Paphimia wanted to see her too. Capsodia took Sharon's hand and dragged her towards the heroine. He wanted her to go because he wanted to protect his free time. Paphimia was just resting. When she saw the master, she immediately rushed to hug him. From behind the guy, Sharon appeared and praised Primil. The girl was happy to see her. An awkward silence hung between them. Suddenly, a second adventurer approached them and joyfully approached the holy priestess. His name was Verdan, and he wanted to personally thank her for curing him that day. The girl smiled sweetly and replied that she was glad he was all right. Verdun blushed and quickly asked if she liked bread because he was good at baking. Then quickly walked over to Capsodium and thanked him for saving him. Misteltam walked over to them. He was not happy that they came to them when they had training in full swing. Capsodia reached out and asked if it was bad that they had come to see the results of their training, but the adventurer hummed and asked if Paphimia was ready to fight. The heroine agreed. They got into a stand. The girl ran at Misteltam. Capsodia was surprised at how fast she ran. He hadn't seen her in only 3 days, but she was already getting much faster. The adventurer put out a fist, and the girl staggered as Paphimia began to attack the man again. The boy noticed that Misteltam hadn't taken a single step. Paphimia had very good abilities and had spirit, but she completely lacked a sense of battle. Her intuition and movement was very straightforward. She was in no way suited for combat. The hero thought that if Primal had enough time, she could make a great hero. But unfortunately, time was running out, and even while they were talking, demons were killing people. Suddenly the girl stopped. Misteltam asked her what was the matter. After all, the fight wasn't over yet. The heroine quietly replied that enough was enough. The man grudgingly asked if that was all she could do. Then the girl couldn't stand it and screamed that there was nothing she could do. She had completed many tasks and began to train under him. She even distanced herself from her friends. But she was still weak. Paphimia couldn't stand it and burst into tears. Sharon covered her mouth with her palms in shock. Capsodia was surprised that she was already giving up. Wiping her tears, Paphimia shouted that she was giving up because she couldn't be a hero. She didn't want to be a hero anymore. Everyone was shocked. Misteltam looked at her perplexed. The girl kept saying that she was leaving and didn't want to be a hero anymore. But suddenly Capsodia came at her with all his might. He jumped on top of the girl and pulled her down, enclosing her in a tight embrace. Paphimia ended up on top of him and said she was in pain. The master replied that she was doing the same to him, so it was a quid pro quo. The hero had a question for her. He asked what she thought she was good at. The heroine replied that maybe physical ability. That was the wrong answer. Then Paphimia said she didn't understand what he wanted from her. Capsodia told the girl that her greatest strength was her spirit. Guy told her that even among the upper echelon demons, there was a shortage of strong individuals like her. Yet among the demon race, no one had the same spirit. Capsodia stated that she was the person with the strongest spirit in the world, so he advised her to start by believing in herself. At first, you just had to put on your courage, hold your head high, straighten up and take a deep breath, and go at your own pace forward. Capsodia asked her to remember that. The girl changed her sad face to a determined one. The boy asked Misteltam if he minded another sparring session. The man didn't mind, but he was sure the result wouldn't change from that. The hero called Paphimia to him and whispered something in her ear. The girl was surprised at his idea, but the master allowed her to act. Sharon asked what he did, but the guy said he just gave her a little advice. Misteltam yelled for Primal to attack. The girl ran at him with great speed. The second adventurer was shocked that she decided to act with a direct attack, because his partner might just beat her again. But it suddenly occurred to him that Capsodia had advised her to fight brokenheartedly as a shield-bearer, for the Blood Wolf clan was known for its incredible resilience, even among half-humans. The hero recognized that the answer was good, but far from the truth. All because she was the hero chosen by Sharon. He glanced at the saint, and the girl immediately began to support Paphimia with shouts. While Primal was running, she repeated one phrase, "Move forward." When she jumped up to Misteltam, she grabbed him tightly, lifted him up, and threw him behind her back. The adventurer didn't have time to realize anything, but already landed head straight into the ground. The game was over. Paphimia had won. Verdun stood in shock at what the girl had done to his friend. Sharon ran up to the heroine, congratulated her joyfully, and hugged her tightly. The girls began to rejoice together at the heroine's victory. Capsodia stood back, folding his arms across his chest, thinking that the most problematic part of heroes was that one shout of encouragement could give them strength. He himself had witnessed instances where they, like zombies, had gotten out of utterly hopeless situations. That was their true strength. The current Paphimia was perfectly capable of being a hero. The heroine, hugging her friend, asked for her forgiveness because she was very lonely without her. The heroine admitted that, as she expected, without Sharon she is not capable of anything, so she realized that everything she has achieved was thanks to the priestess. Euphemia, holding out her pinky finger, asked hopefully if she could continue traveling with her. She promised she would protect her. Sharon, blushing slightly, also held out her pinky finger to Primal and asked her to take care of her. Verdun ran to laugh at his partner. Euphemia went over to thank the master, for everything had gone as he had planned. Capsodia said it was all because she was always clinging to him, though he hadn't tried her fist, but he could tell wrestling was her thing. The guy said the next thing is to gain the courage to defeat any enemy, and advised that as long as she sticks to her point of view, she'll be fine. The heroine smiled and went over to hug the master, but she picked him up just as Misteltim had recently and threw him down. The guy was in the same position. He promised himself he would never give out advice again. Euphemia apologized to the master and admitted that she did it reflexively, Verdun taunting them by yelling to his partner that he had gotten a buddy. Ruviana was sitting in their shared office with Vonyis. While the demon was asleep, the girl finished writing some papers. Approaching the door, she informed her partner that she was going to Brazel's office. The demoness stood in front of a large door. Brazel's recent research had caught the attention of the Demon King, so he had been given a private office. She knocked on the door. The demon allowed her to enter. Brazel asked her what was wrong and if she wanted her own office. Ruviana said that would be nice, but she was fine as she was. Because if they split up instead of working together, it would be counterproductive. She thought it was more fun to work together. Brazel told the girl that she could always turn to him if she changed her mind and asked what business she had with him. Holding out the papers, Ruviana said that she had gathered the documents as he had requested, so she asked him to take a look. But instead of holding out the papers, Brazel took the girl's hand. He pulled her towards him. The girl was outraged at this behavior, but the demon didn't care in the slightest. He seriously asked if she wanted to work with him today. Ruviana replied that she couldn't because she had a dog to feed. Then Brazel rudely asked to leave it to someone else, but the demoness replied that her dog hadn't been well lately. The demon didn't like it and said he couldn't accept it, and asked why she kept rejecting him since he was the strongest of the 4 heavenly monarchs, but they were prevented from going any further. An aide suddenly burst into the office with a report, startling the 2 men. The soldier noticed in shock that the commander-in-chief was not alone. Brazel was angry and wanted to attack him, but he was stopped by Ruviana. The aide was completely confused and frightened, but somehow still reported that the recently tested Hydrolord they had released a few days ago had been destroyed. Brazel and Ruviana looked at the aide in astonishment. Brazel especially was out of shock. He jumped up from his seat, grabbing his head with his hand. He couldn't believe it. After all, the strength of the chimera he released should be 3 times that of the original, and that should be enough to handle an A and S rank adventurer. The demon angrily asked who could have done it. The soldier was trembling all over. He was frightened by his commander's reaction. With tears, he said that they were investigating the matter, but already from the research they could tell that it was people named Misteltim and Verdun. Ruviana had heard of these adventurers. They were widely known among the silver rank adventurers people. Brazel didn't listen to anything and pounded his fist on the table. The aide said that at first they thought the adventurers were stunned, but once the explorers were distracted for a second, the Hydrolord was already defeated. The demoness thoughtfully suggested that perhaps it was some kind of poison, but Brazel shouted angrily that his chimera could not die from human poison. A heavy silence hung. The soldier, thinking he had nothing more to do here, turned around and told the demon that he would go inform the Demon King, but Brazel stopped him. He told the aide that he did the right thing in telling him first, and decided to reward him. But it was a hoax, and Brazel simply directed firepower at the soldier, who was burned alive. Ruviana watched the suffering of the innocent soldier in shock. When there was nothing left of him, she turned angrily to Brazel and screamed at what he was doing. The demon shouted back that he couldn't let this idiot tell the Demon King about his mistake. From this news, Ruviana decided that there were people who could defeat an S-rank monster. And most importantly, they were not from the wilderness. This was very important to the Demon King. She couldn't believe that they couldn't discover this earlier, so she suggested, rally them all together. But Brazel frantically shouted that they didn't need to do that. He blamed it on himself, and claimed that he would deal with her himself. Then there would be no problem with them. But the girl assured him that no one blamed the demon, and they should do as she said. But the demon became even more enraged. He didn't want to listen to her and rudely demanded her to shut up if she didn't want him to destroy her just like he did that guy. Ruviana was frightened into silence. Brazel irritably took the map and placed it on the table, pointing a finger at the location. He said there was a town nearby, and no matter how skillful they were, they must have been wounded, so he assumed the adventurers went there. Ruviana humbly asked what he was going to do. The demon replied that he would lead the fire monsters there. Brazel began to utter crazy phrases about his great self, and to laugh out loud. The girl, drooping, stood watching him in silence. Capsodia caught the balloon that flew away from the little girl. He squatted down and handed it back to her. There was no trace of tears left. The girl thanked the guy. He apologized for crashing into her, and they said goodbye. The inhabitants of the city were watching them reproachfully. Suddenly, black crows flew past the hero. The guy went where they flew. He walked into a dark alleyway, and the ravens turned into 3 unknown people dressed in a hooded robe that completely hid their faces. Capsodia frowned at them. They were Isu, Rato, and Rito. The monster's terrifying scaly paws with long and ugly claws were reaching for Sharon. Suddenly, her loud scream resounded in the guild. The girl fell to her knees, covering her head with her hands. All the adventurers jumped up to her and asked what happened. The saint's gaze was full of terrible fear and consternation. Still also shielding herself from the invisible monster, she told that she felt a terrible anger. Paphemia did not understand and asked what it meant. The administrator assumed it was a vision. It came to Mackenzie as a heavy, dragging, nauseating hunch that perhaps they were demons. Everyone adopted that wary and dislocating mood. The receptionist nervously rushed to calm the adventurers, shouting that it was impossible after all. They were going out in a god-forsaken village. Demons had no reason to come here. Sharon interrupted her and said she didn't understand it herself, for usually her visions were fragmented and vague. But what she saw was a demonic army completely taking over the land. Everyone was startled. Sharon hopelessly finished that maybe this time it would be accurate. Misteltum entered the guild in an unexpected outfit. He was wearing an apron and a headscarf. He was carrying a basket with bread in it. His face was frowning. As he made his way inside the room, he said that he felt a tremendous amount of magic. He felt the spirits released earlier, and a huge number of lizards were now heading towards this city from the west. He explained that since they suddenly appeared all at the same time, it could mean that a large amount of mana had been transferred, and said that there were about 10,000 of them. All the adventurers were dumbfounded, but even more terrified. The administrator turned to Mackenzie and asked what they should do. The old man scratched his long beard thoughtfully. After a bit of silence, he said they would have to leave the city and evacuate everyone. Mackenzie asked Misteltham when the army would arrive. The man said from noon to all day. Afterward, he promised to talk to the mayor and told the boys to run. But Paphemia stepped forward and shouted bravely that she would not run away. Misteltham grudgingly asked Primal to stop because she was not yet a hero, and she would not be able to defeat 10,000 demons. The girl, bowing her head to him, agreed, but it did not matter to her. Then the adventurer said that it would be very foolish of her to go to battle without knowing the strength of her opponents. Then Paphemia said that when she saw the master, she realized something. The master went up against the Hydra Lord without knowing anything about him. He also didn't know anything about Visaga, but the master still saved them and the city. He was very powerful. Taking the bread in her hands, the heroine continued that it didn't matter if they had reasons to protect people or not, or how strong the enemy was, but she needed the strength to move forward. Paphemia was sure that this was a quality that people wanted to see in a hero. Resolutely holding the bread out in front of her as if she were holding a sword, she said that she was the heroine the saint had chosen, so she would destroy the demons and save everyone. Sharon looked at her in surprise. After her motivational speech, the girl took a sharp bite from a piece of bread. The saint, watching her, smiled. Mackenzie supported the heroine and said that since the little one said so, they couldn't back down. They decided to fight. The old man asked Carla to go to the mayor with him because he had business to deal with. Misteltam volunteered to help in the battle as well. He wanted to bake some rolls with his partner, but he won't be able to do that if the city is destroyed. He also said that if he let the petty heroine fight alone, he wouldn't be able to call himself Lightning Flash anymore. The 2 guys who were standing to the side were surprised by his behavior. There was a belief in them that they could win after all. The guys believed in themselves. Paphemia decided to show them her secret technique. The girl happily thanked everyone for supporting her. Sharon approached her and said she was amazing. Euphemia admitted that as long as the master was on her side, she wouldn't run away. Suddenly, everyone noticed that Capsodius wasn't with them. Then the old man asked where the guy was, but he wasn't in the room with them either. Misteltum recognized that it would be glorious if he was with them now, but they couldn't rely on him all the time. Euphemia, running her eyes around the room, looked for the master and thought that if she couldn't overcome even this obstacle, she would never be able to catch up with the master. Capsodia was now standing in a dark alley with 3 mysterious hooded men, Rito, Rado, and Isu. The guy said he was waiting for them. The hero folded his arms across his chest and asked them how they knew he was here. The guys told him that they had performed an autopsy on a verified Hydrolord. Capsodia was not surprised that this chimera was created by Brazel. Then the guy said that even though he could fool the others, he couldn't fool his subordinates. Isu, Rado, and Rito agreed. One of them threateningly warned the Capsodius that he'd better get ready. They suddenly flew up and also abruptly came down, falling to their knees in front of their master. They begged him to help them. The guy was puzzled. The guys, without raising their heads, handed him a stack of papers. Capsodia took them. It was a demon revival list. The subordinates told him that there were about 10,000 of them, which was quite a lot. Capsodia turned to AEs and urged him to pull himself together, for he was the manager of the department. But the hooded man answered him that he was Rito, and Isu was a little to his left. The hero hovered a little, looking at them. The guys continued on for him. They didn't want to ask him for much, but they begged. Capsodia asked what was the matter. Isu, Rito, and Rado wanted him to help them with the list, but the guy had already guessed it. Firmly holding a large stack of papers in his hands, the guy asked his subordinates if it would be okay if he agreed, because if Brazel found out that he had helped them, he would go into a frenzy. One of them angrily replied that some resurrections were bound to take place, complained that Brazel was himself to blame, and was also forcing them to work 24 hours without sleep, and promised that if he did not hire more workers, they would give him a war. One of the guys was shaking and crying. The second was thrashing around in anger and saying that they needed more workers so they couldn't handle 10,000 without Capsodium. The third just kept quiet and stood back. Capsodia, looking at the paper, thought it was a huge list, and also it was the first time he had seen Isa so tired. Brazel was overworking the guys. The former subordinates pounced on the guy, begging him to help them and promising not to tell anyone he was here. The hero recoiled a little from them. Capsodia said that they just shouldn't tell anyone that he helped them. The guys all brightened up and started cheering. The hero saw that the guys were too loaded, and besides his subordinates were too nice to refuse them. Capsodia turned to Rito and said that he would treat him later, but he again did not guess the subordinate and told it to Wrath. The guy asked the guys when everything should be done. They replied that it should be ready in half a day. The hero's face creased. Capsodia wanted to leave, but the guys thanked him, grabbed him, and said they had secured the place, so Isa, Rito, and Rado were placed in a magic circle. At that time, an army of monsters was marching through the forest. One of the demons said that Brazel had fallen on bad times since he was using them to destroy the city. The dragon-like monster asked the other stone demon to relax. After all, this was not a war, Rogan. The stone monster warned to keep his guard up because the one who could defeat the Hydrolord was still here. Bagheera, a dragon-like demon, said that Brazel was bad with names. Rogan asked him to keep quiet if he didn't want Brazel to come up with a name for him too. Suddenly, they saw an army of men ahead of them, with Euphemia at their head, with a formidable-looking Mackenzie, Misteltham, and his guide Verdanus at the rear. Demons immediately realized that it is adventurers to them came to them. They looked belligerent, but only they did not see how many people were. Rogan again asked his friend to keep his guard up, because desperation makes cowards courageous. But Bagheera wouldn't listen, and ran to use his flames on people to fry them to a crisp. Stone shouted to him that they hadn't worked out a plan yet, but the dragon wasn't listening anymore. He stepped closer to the adventurers, flames already emerging from his mouth. He aimed it at the men, but Verdun applied his shield and the flames went past them. Bagheera was shocked that they were able to repel his flames. Rogan shouted for him to get back in line. The adventurers cheered up. Bagheera didn't listen to Rogan and shouted that he had a big hard body and a tail. He wanted to say some more that he would be fine, but Euphemia ran up to him, grabbed his stomach and lifted him up. The dragon indignantly looked down at her. He could not move. The girl kept repeating one phrase, catch and throw. Bagheera did not understand what was happening, and the next second the heroine with all her might threw him behind his back. Bagheera was lying near the trees covered in blood. He was dead. Rogan was shocked that the girl could defeat Bagheera with a single blow. While the Stone One stood in shock, Mistletoe appeared behind his back. The demon had smelled him. He was surprised that he was able to get behind his back and asked what his name was. The adventurer gave his name. Rogan knew it. The demon wanted to give his name, but Mistletoe interrupted him and said he didn't care about the name of someone who was about to die and cut the demon into several pieces. At last, Rogan managed to say who he was. All the demons were in great shock. Mackenzie ordered the rest of the adventurers to go on the attack. Everyone ran. Those who were stronger went to the front line, and those who were wounded immediately went to give first aid. Everyone fought fiercely and bravely. The number of enemies was decreasing every second. The old man, looking at everyone, said he couldn't keep up with them. He swung, but his baton was intercepted by large female hands with long nails. The creepy giantess loomed over the man, her lips stretched in an ugly smile, exposing sharp teeth. She told Mackenzie it wasn't a punch. Swinging, she hit him in the stomach. The man flew off. Euphemia called for Sharon to help him, and ran with Mistletoe and Verdun to attack the huge, strong giantess. Euphemia angrily asked who he was, but the giantess would not tell. She had noticed Mistletoe and was enraptured by his beauty. Then she saw Verdun, and liked him too. The adventurer took advantage of the situation, and while she was busy looking at Verdun was at her back, he swung at her, but she turned sharply and grabbed his sword with her powerful hand and knocked Mistletoe to the ground. Verdun turned to the monster and good-naturedly showed her his shield and asked if she wanted a mirror. The giantess began to examine herself, and then the man called out to Euphemia to do her secret attack. The girl abruptly ran up to the huge monster, grabbed her powerful legs, but she couldn't budge. Then the giantess threw Euphemia and Verdun away. Primal hit the rock and lost consciousness. Verdun jumped up to Euphemia. Mistletoe had recovered from the heavy blow and was bearing down on the giantess with his sword, using a Susanoo lightsaber. The attack seemed to look dangerous, and the giantess seemed to get sick. When the blinding light from the blow had passed, they saw Verdun and Mistletoe standing, and they already thought they had defeated the monster. But the giantess gave a voice and said her name was Hydreigon. With an eerie smile on her face, she revealed that she lived for Mr. Brazel, and she was a warrior who fights for him. She was the general of the Lizardans. The adventurers learned that she was the second subordinate of celestial monarch Brazel. Some of the people blurted out that since she was the second, it made her less intimidating. But Hydreigon irritably shouted for them to be quiet, for the first subordinate was Bastron. But he was dead, so now she was first. Sharon was surprised and couldn't believe it. Hydreigon turned her attention to her and brought her creepy face closer to the saint, asking what a child like her was doing here. The girl was startled. The giantess noticed that the priestess was wearing the clothes of the high-ranking priests of the Aguria sect. She had seen these clothes many times. Their healing magic was giving the monster a lot of trouble. Hydreigon was behind her. She fell her to the ground and pinned her down with her powerful body. She realized that Karen was a saint, sticking out her long, vile tongue, saying she would break her to death. The adventurers could do nothing. The giantess began to do lewd things to the holy priestess, lustfully saying that she just wanted to play with her. When everyone thought there was no way to save Karen, a loud voice suddenly sounded. The adventurers fighting the other demons, Sharon, who was pinned down by Hydreigon, and the giantess herself, froze and looked at the man. It was Capsodia. He looked tired and exhausted. All out of breath, the boy stood looking at Hydreigon with a frown. The giantess left Sharon alone and got to his feet. The hero sat down on the grass and exhaled. He called a break because he was tired. A few hours ago, outside of Novel, Capsodia labored for his subordinates while the boys themselves bagged the bear. Hero had resurrected 7,000 and Isu, Rito, and Rato, the three of them, 10,000. It was in half a day, and it was their new record. One of the subordinates and Capsodia was shaking from overexertion. The other two subordinates were dealing with the bear and had already opened the portal. Now they needed to deliver the goods. The hero lay on the table resting and called out to Rito. He had mixed them up again, but he didn't care anymore. Capsodia tiredly asked where Brazel planned to start the next war. One of the guys casually said that the demon's next massacre would be right here in Novel. The hero's eyes widened and he shouted. One of his subordinates told him that the fire army had already gathered in the west. Capsodia couldn't believe his ears, because the fire army was the strongest army of Brazil, and angrily asked what they were doing here. The subordinates asked the Lord to calm down and told him that it happened because he defeated Hydra Lord. Brazil got angry and used high-level magic to move the troops here. Such news made Capsodia fall off his chair dumbfounded. He knew that in order to use such high-level magic, he needed a sacrifice, for an army of 20,000 would need 20,000 sacrifices. The guy knew that if he used his prisoners, he wouldn't be able to raise 10,000. Then he didn't understand where he got so many victims. And then he realized the demons he had resurrected could be used in battle or as sacrifice. This meant that not only had he wasted half a day, but he had also helped Brazil destroy his second home. Capsodia let out a frantic scream. The guy headed towards the portal without wasting another second. The guys guessed he was going to the battlefield. They were concerned. Capsodia handed them an envelope and said he was leaving the rest to them. They accepted it and said the portal only worked one way, so they would have to walk back, but the hero had already left. The boys were left alone, and they marveled at his resilience and magical power, for after resurrecting 7,000 demons, he could still move around. They broached the subject of their master being fired because they thought he was the weakest, but they didn't think so. One of them who accepted the envelope held it up and cheerfully said they couldn't let him down and called his boys to go somewhere. And so Capsodia stood on the battlefield. Hydreigon said snidely that she didn't expect to see a familiar face here. She was still holding Sharon. The hero looked around the battle tiredly. Some of the adventurers lay unconscious. Sharon shouted excitedly that he shouldn't get close to her because she is a monster and even he can't beat her. But Hydreigon didn't let her finish. She lifted the girl by her waist and hurt her. The giantess called the saint an intrusive woman. She was offended that the priestess called her a monster, but she was amused by the way the girl addressed Capsodius. The giantess gave away his real name. She guessed he had secretly started living in the human city. Capsodia frowned at her. The giantess laughed nastily and said that she knew he would be hiding in the village, but she didn't think in a human village. She decided to scare the hero and said that everyone would know he was a demon. He would be called a traitor. Capsodia, covering his eyes, replied that he just wanted to exist peacefully, and it didn't matter with whom demons or humans. Hydreigon raised her hand up, snapping her fingers to show him the army. She recognized that his wish sounded cool, but he was an idiot, for an army of 10,000 was already heading their way. And then there was the 5,000 she brought with her. They ended up with 15,000. She asked him if he thought he could beat them. Capsodia was shocked. He pointed his finger at her. Hydreigon told her that she had heard that his death-type magic was very strong, but she had also heard that his instant kill skill used up a lot of magic power. She was sure he wouldn't be able to use magic on that many warriors. Hydreigon noticed that Capsodia, the former celestial monarch, looked tired, so with his demigod power, he wouldn't be able to defeat such a large number of army. She believed that 15,000 fighters would kill him. And even if she was killed too, she would be resurrected, and she promised to turn this city to dust in a flash, use a saint, and kill all those people. Capsodia pointed his finger at the demon army and shouted for them all to just die. All the demons behind Hydreigon's back wheezed. The giantess turned around in shock and saw that all the demons were dead. She didn't understand why he had such immense magical power. The hero explained that the halflings had dead man's contact. This allowed them to not expend much mana when using death magic. But as a side effect, the halflings could not increase their level. The giantess realized why Capsodia had only been level 1 all this time. The guy asked Hydreigon how long she would be like this. The body of the giantess lay motionless. There was foam from her mouth, and what was left of her was a ball shaped like a head. She only now noticed how she looked and was terrified. The guy used magic to lift her body. Hydreigon squealed that she didn't want to die, but the guy had already accelerated, brought his fist up and hit her body with all his might, tearing it to pieces. The balloon-shaped Gibbergon lay on the ground, all in tears, and drooling she mourned for her beautiful body. But she wasn't given long to cry. Capsodia sent her straight to hell. The hero crouched on his knees. Despite his best efforts, he had to kill them again. Tears flowed down his cheeks. Sharon was the first to come to her senses. She saw the hero in tears, saw that all the demons had been killed. Seeing the state Capsodius was in, she thought he was mourning demons, so she decided the guy was a true saint. She folded her hands in a lock in front of her and whispered a prayer. She was close to Capsodium, and when he turned at the sound, he was startled that she had gotten so close. The hero began to tidy up Sharon's hair. The girl thanked him. The girl, remembering the battle, cried. The guy hugged her. Suddenly, Paphemia jumped on him from the back. Capsodium slumped over Sharon, and Primal was on top of him. The girl hugged him tightly around the neck. Paphemia hugged him so hard that the guy thought she was 100% fine. The girl had zero upbringing. She started praising the master that he was very cool. After all, he was able to take down demons in no time. The hero asked her to let him go. The other heroes also came to their senses and stood up. Verdun helped Mackenzie and dragged him on his back. Everyone was amazed that Capua was able to overpower everyone alone. Paphemia shouted happily that she had seen everything, the hero's eyes bulging at her. She said that the moment the master raised his hand and pointed his finger at the enemies, all the lizards collapsed one by one. Capsodia was already afraid that the girl really saw everything and would reveal his secret, because his magic was forbidden among people, and if everything was revealed, he would not see a peaceful life. But the girl only said that he made a cool flick in the forehead. She thought that the demons had been hit by a huge wave, and she alone could take more than 10,000 lives. Everyone believed it at once and thought that Capua could defeat the army with just one finger. Everyone was ecstatic and happily pounced on Capsodium. The hero was very shocked. The boys now thought he possessed a miraculous flick, lifted him up and began to swing him around. The hero was in even greater shock, further removed his shoes. The girls thanked the guy for saving the city. The guys began to toss the dazed and outraged hero in the top with shouts. Flying upwards without shoes, Capsodia thought he had no idea what they were thinking, but he was definitely sure that humans were scary creatures. Brazel was furious. He took out his anger on his subordinates because they failed to destroy the city and killed 20,000 soldiers. The demon held his subordinate tightly by his chest. The soldier told him that not only Misteltum, but also his partner Verdun had participated in the battle. The other subordinate was sitting in the corridor all in tears, thinking what they should do. The subordinate, who was now being questioned by the demon, told him that the holy prophecy of Sharon had not come true because there was a hero there who had been chosen to be a saint. The chief was puzzled and said he would take care of it himself. Ruviana appeared in the doorway and said the demon queen was calling him. Brazel wrinkled his face in fury and yelled at his friend for telling her everything. But the girl didn't say anything and said that if he wanted to know the source, he could ask her. Ruviana beckoned him to follow her. She was going to accompany him and gave him her hand. They were still childhood friends. On the way they met Vonis. He asked where they were going. Ruviana said to the queen. The demon queen sat on the throne, with Brazel kneeling on the floor in front of her. He asked how her mood was. The queen was angry with him, and her mood was getting worse and worse. Brazel stared in shock in front of him and wanted to apologize, but the queen pressed his face into the floor. In an ingratiatingly dangerous way, she asked who gave him permission to look up. How could he do that when she was in a bad mood? The demon said he was very sorry for the loss of 20,000 soldiers. The queen feigned surprise and asked who caused such an expense. Brazel wanted to reply, but the demoness directed magic at him which caused a great pain in Brazel's body. He fell completely to the floor and screamed that it was all because of him. But that wasn't all. Brazel not only lost 20,000 soldiers, but also used the magic of great teleportation, which resulted in 40,000 soldiers. But before that, he had sent 5,000 in the same way, and it was already 45. The queen was not happy that she had lost so many soldiers to Brazel's nonsense, but the demon himself said that there had been casualties among the human captives, and they could be resurrected. But the demoness gave him an angry look, and the man fell silent. His bluntness pissed her off. She had noticed that the effectiveness of reviving the dead had decreased lately because they didn't have Capsodium with them. But there was another problem in that Brazel had banished him without her permission. But more importantly, he was trying to hide this information from the queen. The demon was stunned. The demoness looked at him fearfully. Brazel wanted to reply, but the queen pulled out the envelope that Capsodia had handed to his subordinates. The demoness said that she had a secret message. There was written down everything he had done. She told him that she had commissioned an investigation into it. Brazel jumped up and asked who it was. The queen told him at once that neither Vonius nor Ruviana had betrayed him. The queen specifically said that the leader should have been put Capsodius because he was professional and smart. Brazel's face creased, his hands clenched into fists. He was very angry. But in the next second, the demoness pointed the orb at him and said one last thing so he wouldn't doubt her words. The assistant rang the bell, and Capsodium's subordinates appeared on the doorstep. The queen asked them if they could revive him. Isu, Rito, and Rado could, so they got right down to business. The queen summoned Ruviana, who had been standing off to the side watching the whole time. The girl was surprised, but complied with the request. When she was on her knees, the queen appointed her leader for the time being. Ruviana agreed. Lastly, the demoness threw her an envelope and told her to make everyone disappear. Everyone in the room except the assistant disappeared that second. When the queen was left alone, she burst into tears and called Cranbell, her assistant, to her. The demoness told her that she was scared because Brazel had frightened her. She was startled by the demon's scary face, but of course she couldn't show it. After all, it was her job. The assistant plopped the girl down and promised to give her a delicious cake. The queen rejoiced. Everyone who was at the queen's moved to another room. They landed on the floor. Ruviana sat on her lap. Isu, Rito, and Rado were helping Brazel. An envelope lay next to the girl. She opened it and read it. In the letter, Capsodia apologized for his death. The handwriting was indistinguishable, but Ruviana immediately realized who it was and smiled embarrassedly. In the guild, the adventurers were actively celebrating the victory. Capsodia had already drunk 50 mugs. Mackenzie glared at him menacingly. Everyone shouted that the old man had gone minus, and the newcomer was a monster. The guy wiping his mouth thought that human alcohol was weak for him. His thoughts were interrupted by Paphimia. She pounced on him from behind and put her arms around his neck. The girl was drunk. Capsodia asked her to let him go, or she would strangle him. Paphimia thanked the hero for saving them and wanted to lick him in gratitude. The boy pressed his hand to the girl's face, trying to pull her away from him. Misteltam and Verdun passed by them. The hero called out to them for help. But Verdun told him that they were leaving because the Draji were waiting for them. It turned out that from tomorrow they were opening a bakery, Man's Bread. Verdun promised that it would be very tasty, so he invited them to drop by. Paphimia still couldn't settle down, and Capsodia irritably asked her to get away from him for at least a minute. Sharon walked over to them and asked if everything was okay. The guy turned to her and asked for help, but the girl came to ask if he wanted to touch her breasts. Capsodia covered her sharply and asked everyone who had poured alcohol for the child, all of whom said it was grape juice. The holy priestess did not calm down, and suddenly the boy woke up with his arms stretched upwards. It was only a dream. Sitting on the bed, the hero thought he would have a good rest today and asked Paphimia to bake him bread. Suddenly, a girl came out from under the blanket, and as it turned out, further in the bed was also Sharon and the administrator. The guy didn't understand why they were all in his bed. He was especially surprised from Kara, the receptionist. The girls clung to him from all sides and said that he was fine on a hot night. It was all about Kapua's low body temperature. Kara remembered and told Capsodius that he had to make it to the ceremony on time, so she asked him to get up as soon as possible. The boy stood on the stage, gazing up at the beautiful sky while the mayor of the town awarded him. The mayor almost cried as he thanked the hero for saving them from the monster. Everyone gathered in the town shouting congratulations. Capsodium was embarrassed that there were a lot of people around, all asking him to take this chance to become an honorary citizen. The hero began his speech, saying that but told them that he would soon be making his way to another city. Paphimia, hearing this, said she would go with him. Then Capsodia angrily shouted that then there would be no one to protect the place. Primal was in tears. Sharon rushed to calm her down and told her that she shouldn't be so intrusive. The guy thanked the saint and said he was sad too and asked them to take care of themselves. Sharon was crying too, and the hero noticed it. The holy priestess told Capsodium that they had recently received news from the capital that a strong demon had invaded the people's territory. The guy was surprised. Then Sharon told them that when they fought Vazog, another evil demon had taken his place here. He managed to destroy the border garrison in the blink of an eye, but after that, they never received any more news. The guy thought so. and from the description it looked like he fit. An unknown old man intervened in the conversation and told him that when he visited the last town, the patrols were up there. Sharon confirmed this and said that other cities were also on alert and all roads were seriously monitored. Paphemia sadly said that this demon was still roaming the neighborhood and asked the master to stay. The saint intervened and asked the girl to stop holding Capsodius back, for he had already decided to leave. The hero, having heard all this news, decided to stay. Paphemia wondered why he changed his mind. The guy replied that he couldn't leave the city in danger, in his thought, even if this danger is himself. Capsodia, scratching the back of his head, said he wasn't the devil to turn his back on them when the two of them were crying. Everyone roared with joy. Paphemia jumped sharply at the master again. The hero asked the girl not to call him master because he didn't recognize her as an apprentice, and said that if she wanted to be one, she should stop lying in bed and try to catch him. Suddenly, Sharon grabbed his hand and sweetly asked him to now definitely recognize them as apprentices. In the other hand, Paphemia stuck to him and asked her to recognize her as an apprentice too. They decided that they were now official students of Capsodium. The hero grudgingly said that they had asked for it. He decided that if that was the way things turned out, he would poke them to the last, would use their boundless trust to escape his pursuer. He decided that he could definitely start a new life, and there was a long road ahead of him. People were quietly working in the field until they heard horses stomping and strange girls' screams. An unknown girl was being carried into cages, with some kind of mechanism beating her. She was screaming for it to stop and calling for her hero. In the town of Capsodia, everyone began to call Mr. Snap, little children, calling him by that name, asking the hero to play with them. Capsodia squatted down in front of them and lightly slapped them on the forehead. It had been a week since the battle with the Fire Army. Calm had returned to the town of Neville, and the hero himself had become something of a lord of the slaps. The guy went into a dark alley to take a break. The hero had already made a plan to escape from Neville. Suddenly, a horse appeared behind him. It was Bicorn, the first gentleman of the Demon King's army, and he adored underwear. The monster recognized that Capsodium had a good smell and asked what kind of underwear he liked. He wanted to get away because he was tired, but the demon chased after him. Bicorn recognized Capsodius and didn't want to leave him behind, so the guy stopped and asked what he was doing here. Bicorn told him that he had received orders to stay in the capital, but there were no new orders, so he decided to scout the situation outside. Suddenly, he could smell the scent of fine panties. The horse had several pairs of underwear on his head. Bicorn asked what Capsodia was doing here. The guy wanted to get away from him, but the monster pressed him against the wall and asked him ingratiatingly if he was also looking for young girls' underwear. The guy shuddered because the horse started pushing him around and shoving someone's underwear up his nose, saying he was presenting him with top-quality underwear. The hero shouted for him to stop because he didn't need this, but Bicorn wouldn't calm down, and Capsodisia, unable to stand it, killed him. Although, of course, the guy got into a not very pleasant situation, but he found out that there is some kind of operation. And then Sharon and Paphemia came up. The saint said that they are hunting for the underwear thief. But everyone had already seen that Bicorn was lying dead. Paphemia jumped at him again for joy, but Capsodia said he was just passing by. Everyone began to shout joyfully. The hero was already tired of it, and he wanted to escape from the city as soon as possible. A raven flew in the sky, and the guy mentally thought that he hoped for Rito. A few days later, Capsodia received a package. The guy was glowing with joy. He had finally been delivered a magical relic of the Demon King. It was a scarlet mask. If he wore it, no one would be able to recognize him. That's how he planned to escape with ease. The guy was able to beg it in exchange for those resurrections. Kara excitedly turned to Sharon and Paphemia. She informed them that they had received a letter from the royal palace. The girls were surprised and picked up the envelopes. Sharon read the letter. It was an invitation to the palace. Paphemia was shocked, though she realized that since she had been chosen by the saint, she had become a hero candidate. But by receiving the king's call, she could become a true hero. A happy Sharon took the heroine's hand and explained that candidate was just a formal title, and if she was chosen by a saint, she would definitely be a hero. Capsodia heard all this and asked the priestess if it was forced. The saint replied that it was necessary to go there, and even the weakest candidates were obliged to appear. This news made the boy jump high and shout happily. It was a victory. Now no one could stop him from leaving the city. Euphemia squatted down next to him. She was trembling a little. The guy realized that he was too obviously happy, so he wiped away his tears of happiness and told the girl that he was insanely happy for her. The girl was pleased to see the master rejoicing at her progress. Everyone congratulated Euphemia. The hero pretended to be very happy and asked when they would set off, and offered to eat something before the road. They went outside, and Capsodia saw a girl who was sitting in a cage. The unknown called out to Sharon. The saint recognized her immediately. It was Her Highness Princess Maria Jera. Capsodia was shocked that there was a princess in front of him. He thought something might have happened, but he didn't understand why a princess would come to a place like this, and he just wanted to slip away. But again, it didn't work out. The princess was in a cage, which really confused the hero. It was strange. The princess's assistant looked at him and snickered. Sharon walked closer to her and asked her what she was doing here. Mary replied that she wanted to see her, and also she turned to Euphemia and said that she had played a big role in suppressing the fire army. Euphemia thought she would be praised, but the princess shocked her. The girl announced that Euphemia Primel was disqualified from being a hero. Sharon was outraged by such news. They asked what it meant. The princess replied that Euphemia was not fit to be a hero. Capsodia abruptly intervened in the conversation. Maria recognized him and told him that he was always stalking Sharon. The guy didn't understand what she meant, but he had a lot of things he wanted to clarify. But most importantly, he was concerned about why the princess was sitting in a cage. It really stressed him out. Maria found it difficult to explain it in one word, but she answered that it was for the sake of aesthetics. The princess all brightened up and urged them to look at her sturdy grate, the cold floor that had nothing to do with the warmth of a human. She thought she looked just fine in that cage. Capsodia approached her assistant and asked if it was definitely the princess, just in case. The girl calmly replied that the third princess of the Cantabria kingdom, Maria Yeragigu, was in front of him. Elita, pointing to Mary in the cage, said that if Her Highness was outside the cage, she would turn into a huge gorilla. Mary was angered by her assistant and screamed, and after using the lockpick and getting out of the cage herself, the princess disrespectfully turned to Euphemia. The girl angrily replied that she was a she-wolf. The children in the street noticed Capsodius and began to molest him again. The princess, meanwhile, did not like the heroine's savagery. She did not understand why the saint called her a hero. Sharon resolutely turned to Maria and said that Euphemia would be a hero. The princess took an interest in Capsodium and noticed that Sharon was too attached to him. Mary said wryly that she hoped he had not disrespected her honor and defamed her good name. The saint seized the hero by the mantle and said threateningly that this gentleman was their master. At this statement, Mary laughed insolently and said that she could not believe that a saint would obediently listen to a mere mortal like a puppet. Sharon answered her that Euphemia had already received an invitation to the palace. But the princess rudely shut her up and promised that she would feed the pigs this invitation. The children pestering Capsodius poked him in the fifth point, which made the poor fellow begin to pile right on top of Mary. Rubbing his seat, he promised to send the loon to hell. Capsodia lowered his eyes, and only now noticed that he was sitting on the princess, grasping her breasts. The girl looked at the guy in embarrassment, tears already starting to gather in her eyes. The hero was also surprised and rushed to apologize, but Maria had already burst into tears and screamed all over the street. An invisible shield formed in the sky and began to cover the area of the city in a circle. Capsodia, watching this, thought it was very bad. He had a very bad feeling. The princess's assistant kicked him in the back and rudely asked him how long he was going to sit on the princess. The hero grimaced and asked who she was. The elite reintroduced the girl. The princess was Cantabria Maria Yeraguigu, known as the Barrier Saint. Now there was a barrier hanging over the city. The children were pointing their fingers at it, and so all the inhabitants didn't pay attention to it. Everyone was confused at first, but it turned out that the barrier only held demons. So Capsodia stood near the barrier and poked his finger at it. He, of course, couldn't get through, which he was very sad about. He thought it was a good thing for the people to be able to overcome it safely, as the barrier was only from the unclean, and most likely even a demon queen would have a hard time breaking it down. If Capsodia broke him, he could be discovered immediately, then his secret would be instantly revealed. The unpleasant realization only now came to the hero that there was one hero and two saints in Neville's city, so even if he managed to break the barrier, they would be a hindrance in his path. So he decided to get out of here. He needed the princess to recognize Paphimia as a hero. Paphimia was in training with Mistletoe, with the princess Alita and Sharon watching on the sidelines. The heroine defeated all of her opponents with a single blow that Capsodia advised her. Mistletoe was basically pleased with her success. Still, he wasn't satisfied that her hips weren't going in smoothly enough, so he asked her to do it again. After one more time, Mistletoe praised her, saying that now everything was fine. Sharon turned to Maria and asked how she felt about the girl, as she showed how strong she was. But the princess still wasn't satisfied with the heroine and said she was disqualified. Princess Maria had the nerve to say that Paphimia was not going to be a hero. Capsodia, who had been watching on the sidelines, was upset. The holy priestess replied in defense of her heroine and also said that the girl was winning against silver-class heroes, so she asked the princess what exactly she was dissatisfied with. Princess Mary thoughtfully replied that it wasn't about who she was defeating. She needed an image, for she believed that a hero was someone who remained graceful even during battle. So she didn't like the fact that Paphimia was so ugly, just grabbing and throwing the enemy. Paphimia Primal growled and spat out that this was her style, and no one cared about her appearance in battle. Maria asked the girl if she had ever rescued the princess. Paphimia and Sharon stood hugging each other. They turned confusedly towards the princess, and the heroine replied that she hadn't yet. Mistletoe, meanwhile, was pestering the adventurers. The princess said that 10 years ago she had been captured by slave traders. Every day was like hell. She was beaten with whips and allowed other obscenities. Capsodia had been listening to her story all this time without showing his eyes. When the girl said that she was in the basement of the gambling house and was plunged into despair, the guy remembered everything. The hero was in this gambling house and saved the princess from there. He was wearing a mask and a black robe, so Princess Mary could not see his face, but remembered and fell in love with his image. Paphimia said that their master also had a black robe, but the girl shrieked that she should not compare her savior to a pervert, Capsody. The princess remembered still with what grace he had defeated those rascals, and the contrived love and tenderness with which he had held out his hand to her. To her, he was a true hero. Capsodia, who was eavesdropping on their conversation around the corner, turned pale and looked at them. Alita noticed him and covered her mouth with her palm to hold back a chuckle. She knew him. The hero was sitting in the guild with a mug of ale. Alita came over to him and sat at the table with him. He was waiting for her. She asked him angrily what had brought her here. Alita was a longtime companion of Capsodia. She is a neutral demon. The girl said that word had reached her from an old friend. Alita turned to the bartender and asked to bring the most expensive wine. After all, we'll pay her dear friend. The hero was furious and shouted long ago whether her conscience was taken away. After some manipulations, the guy still agreed to pay for her. Capsodia whispered quietly for her not to say his real name, but the girl didn't care. She continued in a mundane tone, saying that in such a wilderness no one knows the names of heavenly monarchs, much less his. The guy was not happy and made a hurt face, but Alita decided not to dwell on it anymore and offered to get to the point. She realized that the hero remembered that day 10 years ago, so he called her. Capsodia made sure that everything really did add up and that the poor girl he had saved was the princess. 10 years ago, Capsodia infiltrated the capital of the Kingdom of Cantabiria. Cantabiria is the country ruled by Maria's father, and Elite was the guy's guide. Capsodia had to hide his identity under a mask. The infiltration was successful. They had no problem finding detailed information about the kingdom's combat power, but the Demon Queen was interested in sweets, games, and capital investment. Once Capsodia and Elite decided to wind down, they learned of a secret auction house. An unknown person told them that demons were being sold and bought there. Capsodia decided to look at how people were profiting from them, and just there was Maria. He found her as the three men were bullying her. They beat her, humiliated her, but the suffering came to an end when the guy killed them with instant death. Capsodia turned to her and asked how she was. He thought from her voice that she was a dark fairy or a succubus. But her ears were human, he was surprised, and later learned that demons was a code word in underground organizations that meant special merchandise. Therefore, Capsodia himself, without knowing it, saved the princess of the kingdom. The hero was interested in how Alita took a position at court, because then she simply vaporized. The girl said that it was all thanks to the princess. Alita had cured her wounds with magic, but the princess's mental state hadn't recovered. She couldn't forget her savior. The hero was in despair. He didn't know what to do now. The girl guessed that Capsodia had called her not only to turn the past. The boy told her that he had to get out of Neville. He also revealed that even if he could manage the barrier, Paphemia and the others would be a hindrance to him. So he planned to make a hero out of Premill. He asked Alita to help him get rid of the princess. The girl suspiciously easily agreed to help. The hero immediately realized that she was up to something. Alita slyly said that she had one condition. Alita had asked Caspodius to appear before the princess in a red mask, and, briefly, she wanted to draw a line between her fantasies and reality. So the masked hero was now standing on the roof of the house with Alita and watching Maria. They waited for the princess in a dark alley, and the boy didn't think she would dare come here after all. However, Capsodia hadn't forgotten about the check the bartender had given him, so he leaned threateningly toward the girl and said there was one conversation waiting for them afterward. Alita paid no attention to him and urged the boy to look to see that everyone had arrived. There was not only the princess in the alley, but also suspicious-looking men. When they noticed the girl, they slowly approached her, one of them asking her with a greasy look what she was doing in such a place. At first glance, the princess seemed confused and started to move away from them to the wall. She began to shout that she was Cantabiria Maria Yera Gigu, and that they might be torn apart by her father's knights. But the men did not appreciate her threat, and only laughed vilely. The girl slumped against the wall and stared into the man with frightened eyes. One of them was already close, and said they were just out for a walk, and she thought too much of herself. Capsodia wanted to intervene, but Alita told him not to look away and to watch, and to observe the princess's breathing carefully. Maria, her whole body trembling, hissed that he was a monster. The men's hands reached for her. The girl instantly remembered what had happened to her 10 years ago. She begged to stop and called for help. But suddenly her breathing became strange. Everyone froze. Capsodia on the roof watched carefully. The men stopped coming too. When the princess noticed that everything had stopped, she wondered why they had stopped. Her face changed from cute desperate to a perverted maniacal creepy scary face, her eyes staring madly at the confused men, her wet tongue sliding across her lips. She was asking to do things to her, to corrupt her, and so on. Capsodia grimaced when he saw what the pretty princess had turned into. The girl was shouting to the men, asking them to get closer to her, to use her faster, and then, unexpectedly for the guy, Alita pushed him down. The boy, screaming, flew down. His head bumped with one of the men, and he fell down without feelings. When the hero looked up at Alita, the girl was gone. The men were so frightened and confused that they decided for their own safety not to find out who this man was who had fallen on their heads, and ran faster out of the cursed alley. Capsodia didn't realize how they didn't care. He already wanted to stop them, but the men ran away at the speed of light. The guy was left alone with Maria. The girl stared at him in amazement. She recognized her hero and jumped at Capsodius happily, knocking him down. The guy was angry that she jumped on him like that. He was hurt, but the girl didn't care. She sat on him and said that she always wanted to see him again someday. She also admitted that she always thought about him. Her face turned red and tears flowed from her eyes. Capsodia looked at her grimly. He immediately realized that he was going to have a harder time than he thought. He quickly sat up and said that this pose was strange. The girl came to her senses and immediately apologized. She wanted to do something but didn't finish. But quickly changing the subject, she asked Capsodius if he was free now, because she wanted to introduce him to Sharon. Mary grabbed his hand and told him that the saint had been like a little sister to her, but now it was necessary to put her in her place. To Princess Sharon, she was a complex and insecure child, and even after becoming a saint, the girl felt that the priestess had not advanced in her thoughts at all. The hero wondered if she was talking about Sharon accurately. The princess revealed that she had taught the saint a lesson on her own, but she didn't hold back and kicked her out of the courtyard. Princess Maria continued, already sad that despite this Sharon had managed to find a hero before her, pressing herself tighter against Capsodia. The girl cried out that it didn't matter anymore because she had found the real one. The boy in his mind was asking for it to be over quickly. The princess dragged the hero to Paphimia, Sharon, Misteltam, and Verdun, and introduced him to them as a true hero. Everyone was a little surprised, especially Paphimia and Sharon. None of them recognized Capsodius, though they had only recently had breakfast with him. The boy immediately thought how they had imagined him to be. But further, Maria dumbfounded everyone with the following news. Sharon, she informed that she was going to the palace with her hero. The guy in general did not expect this in any way and was in a huge shock. Looking at Alita, he remembered that she had promised him that she could escape after this performance. But that turned out not to be true. And now Alita could barely contain her laughter looking at this situation. The hero remembered how she used to bully him when he was still a celestial monarch, and grudgingly thought that she hadn't changed at all. Paphimia and Sharon were outraged, Saint telling the girl that it was too harsh. Sharon was puzzled how she could say such a thing. Mary looked at her seriously and asked her to shut up, for she was doing it with concern for her, but the holy priestess did not understand. The princess recognized that Sharon was capable, but thought that the battlefield was no place for children like her. The hero, looking at Maria, thought she wasn't an adult herself, but she was right about something. After all, if Paphimia was chosen to be a hero, then Sharon is also obliged to participate in the battles. Since she made that decision, the saint protects with her unusual power, and they kind of complemented each other. Therefore, Capsodia would not want to send them into battle either. Paphimia rudely replied to the princess that Sharon was not some tool to speak of her like that. Capsodia suddenly stood in front of Princess Mary and covered her with himself. Mary was displeased and shouted to Paphimia that a saint and a hero always go into battle together, and Karen was too young for that. Therefore, she believed that an inexperienced hero like Primal would not be able to protect Sharon. Paphimia agreed with her. Sharon really was just a child. But the princess had no idea what the saint had to go through to find her. Primal understood that they had a lot to aspire to, but the girl was adamant that if she didn't acknowledge them, despite her position as princess, she would get very angry. Capsodia felt the atmosphere was heating up, and now he was going to go with Elite's scenario. The boy spoke up and asked to be allowed to fight Paphimia. The girl was thrilled with the hero's voice. Capsodia said, "Win send to the palace." Maria pounced on it and blissfully said it was a great idea. The princess defiantly turned to Primal and told her to think hard about the offer, because if she lost, she could no longer be a hero, and Sharon would return to the courtyard. Mary struck fear into the girls, but the saint and the heroine looked at each other, took each other's hands firmly, and shouted bravely that they agreed to fight. The hero was happy about this turn, because he could lose to them on purpose. Then his trip to the palace would be cancelled and all the interference would be eliminated. Finally, he could start a second quiet life. The guys wanted to have the battle the next day, but Paphimia said she was ready now. The guy was ready too. The princess hugged the boy and asked for a better tomorrow, because these two would have to be separated forever. Capsodius thought something suspicious about her insistence, but agreed to do battle the next day anyway, which he later regretted. Because the third princess of the Kingdom of Cantabiria, Her Highness's Cantabiria, Maria Yerugiga, has been kidnapped. Paphimia, Sharon, and Capsodia were quietly eating breakfast in their room when a panting Alita suddenly burst in on them. Everyone was in great shock that the princess had been kidnapped. The guy asked with one look if this was in Alita's plans, but the girl shook her head negatively. Sharon was most upset. She knew that Princess Mary had had to be side by side with danger all her life. She was always in the line of fire in the War of Succession. It was expected that once she took the throne, she would be the first Saint Queen in Cantabiria. However many siblings treated her poorly, there were those who wished her dead. While the hero stood listening to Sharon's story with his plate in his hands, thinking that now the story of the slave traders was clearer, Alita snatched a croissant from him. The saint sadly continued that when she first entered the courtyard, she knew no one. However, Princess Mary supported her, although she herself was not easy. But she still continued to encourage the priestess. Sharon sadly covered her mouth with her palms. The girl was approached by Paphimia and offered to go and rescue Mary. The saint asked if she was sure, but the heroine said that she was the universal hero that Sharon had chosen, so she just had to come to the rescue. The holy priestess approached Alita and said that they should increase their strength and suggested asking for help from the true hero princess. Alita glimpsed a glimpse of Capsodium. The guy was beyond thrilled that he was able to change Alita's scenario from yesterday, and it turns out she bent over for him. But the girl replied that she hadn't seen him yet and assumed he had already gone looking for her. Paphemia asked the master if he would go with her, but Capsodia replied that she didn't need his help. Primil confidently agreed, and she and the boy bumped fists together. The girl asked that they leave the search to her. Everyone agreed. Their operation to retrieve the princess began. The guys were in the forest. The heroine sniffed the grass to smell the princess. Primil was a red she-wolf, so she had a strong sense of smell. So sniffing the grass, she smelled the exact scent of the princess. Sharon turned to Alita and asked how she was always good at identifying kidnappers and finding their hideouts. The girl said that they dark elves were good at espionage. They created an information system around the world. With its help, there is a constant exchange of data. There was everything from village rumors to the secrets of the demonic world. Saint was delighted and said she had always wondered why the princess didn't have guards, but now knew that if anything happened to her, Alita could find her right away. They came across a horse and wagon, and nearby was a passage to a cave. Paphemia asked what she could be in there. Sharon curiously asked if her hero was here. Because it looked like all things had been left behind in a hurry, Alita replied that whoever it was had arrived much earlier than them. In the end, the girls decided not to wait. Alita speculated that the cave might have been just a staging point, and if it was moved elsewhere, it would make it harder for them to find it. Paphemia stood up. She was excitedly stopped by Sharon. The heroine touched her hair and told her not to worry because she would handle everything. Suddenly, Alita stepped in and said she was coming too. The girls were surprised, but the elf explained that if there were demons involved, her power would be useful. The girls told Sharon to stay to wait, but the saint was reluctant and determined to go with them too. Paphemia said it might be dangerous, but the priestess replied that it would be even more dangerous if they were separated. The girl took Paphemia's hand and embarrassedly added that she would protect her and called Primil her heroine. The she-wolf was embarrassed and said it wasn't fair because she couldn't refuse her. Alita, who was watching them, noticed that between the heroine and the saint got a good lawyer. The girls did not hear and thought that she called someone's name, but the elven woman did not explain anything to them, and they finally ran to the cave. Some bandits had already been defeated by Paphemia's hold. The girls ran further into the depths of the cave, whispering that surprisingly there weren't many bandits. Paphemia reported that the smell of the princess was getting stronger. Suddenly they heard Maria's displeased voice. The girls looked out to see what was going on. The girl demanded that they stop touching her, but then it turned out that the bandits had made a disgusting sabari because it didn't hold up at all. Paphemia, Alita, and Sharon were at a loss. The princess was sitting freely on the boxes. No one held her down and she was in no danger. She chatted defiantly with the bandits. One of them she asked to be tougher. She was bored with them and didn't want to waste time while she waited for her hero. The girl, shifting her hands sadly, said sadly that her hero wasn't in much of a hurry. Next, she snapped out of her seat and showed the inexperienced thug how to tie her hands. Then she asked him to tie her. The guy was embarrassed and started tying her hands. The princess complimented his muscles and technique. But then he did something wrong and she screamed at him. She asked for it to be tight, but the man didn't want any marks on her skin. Maria screamed at him that everything had to look real. The men called her the legendary princess kidnapper. The girl playfully replied that she thought the days of being called that had passed. Looking around the place she was in, she admitted that she hadn't been to this hideout in about 2 years. The princess wanted to leave an autograph, and then suddenly Alita from the tube spat a needle right into the bandit's back. The elf told the girls that her hand had slipped. Maria was all bright-eyed and thought her hero had arrived. But to her great disappointment, Paphemia, Sharon, and Alita came out to her. The girl said, as if nothing had happened, that she thought the hero had already come to save her. Princess Mary was too caught up in her games. Sharon couldn't stand it. Apologizing, she quickly reached over to Mary and whipped her with a hard slap. Mary clutched her cheek and looked at the saint in a daze. The priestess apologized again and asked to be allowed to speak her mind. Sharon said that her hero, Paphemia, disregarding the risks, came to save her. She came to bring her back safe and sound. She was aware of all the consequences that could happen to her after being hit. But the girl demanded that Mary finally do something about her boorish behavior already, and demanded that the princess apologize to her hero and thank her. Sharon nodded and looked angrily at Maria. The girl was surprised, but understood that Euphemia was a true hero to Sharon, so she apologized to the heroine. Primal awkwardly replied that she wasn't angry. The holy priestess again asked the princess for forgiveness, but Mary was not angry, and replied that even her patience was not eternal. Suddenly, crying was heard from outside. It was the bandits. The men stood crying over the situation, asking the girls to continue. Alita admitted that there was so much tension that she didn't even know at what point to stick her neck out. Euphemia raised her head up sharply, and immediately something unknown broke through the ceiling and landed right on their heads. The girls managed to bounce away. Everyone looked at the one who had made so much noise. When the dust cleared, a dragon of enormous size appeared before them. His name was Gongal, and he was a proud dragon, an agent of the intelligence unit of the Dragon Queen's army. At this time, Capsodia dazedly noticed that his power had disappeared. Standing in the rain, he didn't understand why it was happening now, but the guy decided to calm down, because the heavens couldn't turn away from him now, he hoped. It was raining outside, and the townspeople were sheltering in their houses because of it. All traces would be gone, and it was a good chance to get out of town. He approached the barrier. It was hard to break it because everything physical and magical passed through it, but he thought half his strength would be enough to do it. Capsodium's power could also be called magical. Magic came from nutrients. From there, people and demons took life energy. In addition, he was the only one among the demons who possessed the element of death. He was the one who took lives, so when he touched the barrier with his finger, he told the barrier to die. Small cracks immediately began to appear all over the protective circle, and then the barrier burst without a problem. The hero was overjoyed. While Capsodia was breaking the barrier and rejoicing that he had finally succeeded, Euphemia was fighting Gongal in the meantime, the girl repeating the same words to herself that she must move and move forward. But the dragon was very agile and quickly dodged the heroine's attempts to catch him. Gongal didn't like that the girl was too bold, so he was getting angry. Sharon got into the fight. She pointed her hands at them and spoke her spell. She summoned a magical defense. The dragon was a little impressed with the girl's powers, but he quickly destroyed her magic. The demon chuckled vilely and said they couldn't take it and they better beg for his mercy. Maria was lying in Alita's arms, and she asked the elf if she had a plan. Alita told her, and they set to work. The dragon built a fire around them, shouting that its flames could melt metal, and they would be nothing but embers. The cave was too narrow to put up a barrier, and a human body couldn't last in that temperature. But then suddenly, Euphemia ran at him at the speed of light. Gongal was surprised at first, but then accepted the challenge and shouted to her that she would not outsmart him. The dragon saw the girl use the same practice again, but then noticed a barrier on the heroine. This barrier was placed on her by Princess Mary, and when Primal approached the dragon, she destroyed her barrier with a snap of her fingers. Euphemia grabbed the monster. She lifted the enraged dragon up. He screamed for her to let him go. The girl slugged him behind her back. Gongal was defeated, and the heroine fell senseless. Sharon managed to catch her. Euphemia was exhausted, she needed a rest. The princess ran up to them and noticed that Sharon needed a rest too. She wanted to take care of them, but suddenly they heard the dragon laughing. He rose nimbly from the ground, his right well. He admitted it wasn't bad, and it made sense to him now how they had defeated the fire army. Euphemia was shocked that he was still alive, but the dragon was also surprised that the heroine had hoped to kill him with one blow. Suddenly, they were interrupted by the princess. Maria stood between the monster and the girls. She noticed that he was badly shaken and asked if he was sure he could handle it, for her hero was supposed to be approaching them soon. Gongal was puzzled. The girl gave her name and said that she was the one who created the protective barrier, and since she was a saint, there must be a hero with her, so she offered him a deal. Maria held out her hand to him and told him that she alone would remain his hostage, and he would let Alita, Euphemia, and Sharon go. Euphemia and Sharon were dumbfounded. They were not going to leave the princess alone with him. Maria didn't listen to them. All her attention was directed to the dragon. She promised him that she could buy time, and when her hero came, he would die. And it was also favorable to Gongal that he would let the three of them go, but could take one saint for himself. The dragon angrily replied that her hero would not help her and agreed to it. The girls tried to talk her out of it, but Gongal had already grabbed her and flew out of the cave. Sharon yelled for her to come back, but it was too late. Gongal flew through the sky with Maria. He felt that Paphemia had broken a few bones for him after all. Maria began to giggle unhealthily. The monster got angry and asked her what she was laughing about. The girl confessed to him that she really liked his scales, hard and cold. The dragon didn't understand what nonsense she was talking about. Maria pressed herself tighter against him frantically, saying that she had always dreamed of being kidnapped by a dragon. Gongal screamed for her to get off him. The girl started acting weird. The dragon asked her to stop because his body belonged to the little sister he had loved since he was 10 years old. But the princess was not embarrassed by it. It was even more interesting that way. Suddenly, Gongal's eyes rolled up, and they flew downward. Capsodia ran happily through the grass. He was glad he could escape. It was the long-awaited freedom he had sorely missed. Now he was wondering what he should do. He never wanted to live in the city. Now he could start a quiet life in the mountains where no one would get him. Just when he thought his life was beginning, a huge Gongal came crashing down on him. The boy turned to see what had happened and saw Maria. The girl stroked her bruised head, and when she opened her eyes and saw her long-awaited hero, she threw herself at him. Maria was thrilled that the hero had saved her again. Capsodia was very upset that his plan had failed again. He stood and lamented his failure. The princess came very close to him and put her hand on his chest and asked why he saved her. Her hand was trembling. She asked who he was and asked him to take off his mask. The hero wanted to leave, but the girl grabbed him firmly by the waist. The girl clung to him and embarrassedly said that he was probably carrying her for a reason, but she was ready to accept him and promised to be by his side forever. Capsodia had not uttered a word in all this time. The girl had apologized for her inappropriate behavior for a princess, but she assured him that behind the princess mask there was a lonely girl. Maria, putting her hand on his cheek, began to move closer to him. When the distance between them remained nothing at all, the girl said that he could not answer and just cover her lips with his. But Capsodia didn't move. Maria was waiting for him to kiss her. She had already decided that he was teasing her and started to move even closer. The hero didn't know what to do, and suddenly an idea came to him. When the princess asked him to hurry up, Capsodia took off his mask. The girl screamed in surprise. The boy grabbed her hands and asked her cheekily where her promise was, for here before her was the face of her hero. But the girl angrily shouted that it was a lie, for such a ridiculous, dirty pervert like him could not be a hero. Capsodia shouted for her not to call him names, and repeated her words that she was ready to be with him forever. Maria angrily demanded that he forget about it. She shouted that he was not a true hero, and sat down on the grass. The hero saw that the girl was confused. He had assumed that if she saw him, he could avoid both the palace and the battle, but now he worriedly thought he had overdone it. Capsodia asked if she was all right. The princess at the moment was dumbfounded at the thought that she was glad the hero had turned out to be a fake, even though she had wanted to see him that time. The guy asked what scared her so much. The girl turned to him and thought she was afraid to meet him, feeling as if her hero would disappear. There was a dragon behind the girl. It had already swung at the girl to kill her, but Capsodia pulled her out from under his sword in time. The dragon was surprised that the princess ducked, then saw the guy look first at the dragon and then at his broken mask. The hero needed to kill him quickly, but the princess could see everything, he thought to finish her. But then he will be pursued by the whole country. Capsodia thought of nothing better than pretending to be a poor man. Gongal, of course, didn't believe him. The dragon already recognized the former monarch and called him by his real name. The princess was aside, but she heard the name, but couldn't make out the rest because of the rain. Maria was disappointed at what a silly show her hero had put on. But suddenly she caught herself calling him her hero, for her hero is good-natured and good-faithful. Gongal was beyond furious and wanted to start at the root of all evil, the princess. But Capsodia had her back to him and cast his instant death magic on him. The dragon was destroyed. Maria was amazed that at the very last moment Capsodia protected her. The girl stood up. The hero kept thinking what he should do, how to explain everything to the girl. The princess walked up to him and told him that he had killed again with just one finger like 10 years ago. The guy babbled from what she appeared to remember it. He covered his mouth with his hand, but it was too late. Mary was all brightened up and then nodded at him. She realized it was all him who had saved her then. Hugging him around the waist, she looked at him from bottom to top and asked about his real name. She was thrilled that the hero's real name was known even to the demons. The guy denied it, but the girl wouldn't listen to him and suggested giving her a nickname or calling her simply Darling. Capsodia could not get away from her, and then the princess took him by the hand and led him. The hero asked where she was taking him. The girl led him to the palace. From this news, the guy turned pale. There was no way he wanted to go there. The girl asked why, but thought it was all about Sharon and Paphimia. So she hurriedly told him that he could forget about the argument and promised to take the saint and heroine with him. Capsodia grabbed her by the shoulders to make her stop and scowlingly told her that he was a demon, so the other monsters knew his name. This was the last trump card of the guy. He gave her the truth, but the girl took this news as a joke. The hero shouted that it was not a joke, but then suddenly Paphimia jumped in front of him. Landing painfully in the grass, the heroine grudgingly asked why he was ducking. The guy told her that if he hadn't ducked, he would have died. Sharon was with the heroine. She was happy to see the princess alive and unharmed. Paphimia noticed Gongal's corpse, and of course guessed it was the master who killed him. Capsodia asked disappointedly why she missed it. The heroine said that the princess made it hard for them that time because she had a habit of suddenly disappearing. The elite were very angry with Maria. The princess promised that she wouldn't do it again. The elfess closed that one's eyes in anger, and when she did remove her palm, Maria looked at Sharon and apologized. She recognized Paphimia as a hero and told her that she had finally found her hero. At those words, she hugged Capsodius and announced to everyone that she and Capsodius were going to the palace as well. Paphimia and Sharon were in a huge shock. They couldn't believe that their master was now the princess's hero. The guy shouted that he hadn't given his consent yet, and besides, he had other plans. But Maria shouted that she was ready to go with him, even to the end of the world. The princess had succeeded in beating agreement out of Capsodium. Everyone was happy except the guy. Paphimia and Sharon could not understand how he became a hero. The saint demanded an explanation. The poor hero was surrounded on all sides. He had no choice but to follow them to the palace. Capsodia woke up and picked up the map in his hands. They had been on the road for 2 weeks now and were now in Luxembourg. It was still half a day away from the capital. Sitting on the bed with him was a naked Maria. They started a nice conversation, but it turned out that it was a terrible dream that Capsodium had. But in reality, everything was like in the dream. The girl asked about the nightmare. The guy replied that the nightmare was right there in front of him. He yelled out what she was doing in his bed. But then he suddenly thought that maybe the girl might have had PTSD after all the kidnappings, so he thought she was scared to go to sleep alone. But the girl dispelled those speculations. She said she was here to put a face to the fact. There was a cage above them, Maria said with a smile. She wouldn't let him go. The princess moved closer to him and wanted to continue, but Paphimia and Sharon appeared from under the blanket, and Alita was also lying on the side. They were all unclothed. The hero bluntly asked what was wrong with them, why they were naked in his room. Paphimia replied that his body was pleasantly cold. He helped them cope with the hot summer nights. Capsodius decided to talk sense into the girls, but they started talking about their own things, so the boy got angry and demanded that they leave the room. The guys finally arrived in the capital. There were a huge number of people walking on the beautifully decorated streets, some playing music, some eating delicious desserts, and some just enjoying the walk. Paphimia, looking out of the carriage window, was delighted with the city. Capsodius sat dejected. He had never been able to chase the girls out of the room. The hero, looking unhappily at the capital, could not believe he had really come here. The Kingdom of Cantabiria was the third largest country in human territory, second largest in population. In terms of military might, it was also second only to the strongest human state of the Des Ilans Empire. Forestry and agriculture flourished in the kingdom, and there was a vast valley to the west that was rich in ore. In that valley was the front line of the demon and human army clash. Capsodium had a large number of secret missions there. The boy was so preoccupied that he didn't remember how he got to his room or how morning came. The guest room he was in was huge, as one would expect from a royal palace. Lying on the bed, Capsodia thought that he had no choice but to be a demon and become a hero, because if he tried to escape, either the guards or his walking troubles would find him. And If he kills someone, he will be persecuted by the whole country, and his carefree life, which had not yet begun, will be over. Unfortunately, he's at a dead end. His depressing thoughts were interrupted by Alita. When she walked in, the guy yelled angrily for her not to enter his room unannounced, but the girl wasn't alone. There was a strange man with her. The guy introduced himself. His name was Wangud Giga Kantab Yuria. The hero thought he had a royal name. Then Wangud asked Alita to leave them alone. When it was just the two of them, the man gave Capsodium a shock when he called him the fourth monarch, Mr. Capsodium the Deadly Scorpion. The man knew him. The hero already wanted to attack him, but Wangud asked him to calm down. He warned that there were guards standing outside. If the slightest sound was made, they would come here immediately. So the man advised him to take his finger away from him. Then Wangud proposed to continue the dialogue in his office, because there they were already waiting for wine and women. The guy was not interested in either alcohol or women, but he agreed. When Capsodia came to his office, he was very surprised. There were other demons gathered there. The girl stood up to greet him, but the guy warned her not to move and asked Wangud what the demon was doing here. The man grinned. He expected such a reaction from Capsodium-san. Suddenly, there was an explosion right from the ceiling, and then a cute girl appeared. It was a troll Kitsune. Along with her was also a troll with him eye. Then Capsodia didn't understand anything and asked what this demon exhibition was about. Wangud grinned and said he had a sense of humor. The hero cut to the chase and asked what his purpose was. Wangud smiled and replied that he wanted to destroy the country, and when the kingdom of Cantabiria became demon territory, he was going to take over. And so, by the way, asked the hero to put in a good word for him with the demon queen. Capsodia was shocked. The man wanted to unite with the demons, but then thought that he could not put in a good word. So Wangud did not know that he was banished. The guy decided to first deal with the situation. The hero replied that whether Wangud realized what he was saying, for such a thing could be seen as a clear betrayal of the human race. Plus, Capsodia had warned him that the demon queen hated humans the most, so he warned him not to think he'd have it easy. The man was not in the least upset by this. On the contrary, he replied that if he called him a traitor, what about his initiation as a hero tomorrow? The hero's face creased. Wangud continued that if this news was presented to the demon queen, he thought she would deign to give him some time. But Capsodia grudgingly said that it wouldn't be that easy. A troll intervened in the conversation and said it was very simple, for they were spies sent to paralyze the palace's capabilities. The hero was shocked by this news and asked what their assignment was. All the demons jumped up, startled by his reaction, and asked him to feel sorry for them. The demons stammered and said that they hadn't heard from the central control for a long time, so they were confused until the prince found them. Suddenly, Capsodia remembered the demon underwear snatcher who had also talked about it. Then the guy seriously inquired what the purpose of their operation was. Kitsune said that they were to hide in the palace and take the king and queen hostage. Then, at their signal, 200 demons who were now in ambush were to rush into the capital. Listening to this, the guy couldn't understand what was the point, because the strength of so many demons exceeded the strength of the capital's troops 3 times, and it was harder for people to use large-scale magic in the city. Then Capsodia thought that maybe he didn't know something, so he couldn't understand, and he was also curious whose orders it was. The hero looked at Wangud and asked him why he agreed to go along with this. The man strode in deep and said that he was probably already guessing. In the Battle of Succession, Maria Jera was now in the lead, and of course, although it was called a battle, it was still the king who made the decision, but it was based on public opinion. And the people liked Mary best of all, and if things were left as they were, Mary would be queen. The hero imagined her, and he felt uncomfortable. Wangud and Capsodia were in a depressed state. Maria Era had 2 titles, princess and saint. There was a case in the past when a saint took the throne. She enjoyed popularity and was given the title Holy Queen. Now the people are hoping for the second coming. Wangud went on to say that the people had no idea of Mary's oddities, so he felt he was obligated to take the throne. Wangud said he found them and learned about the talking operation. The man had a ring and used it to harm Kitsune. A collar appeared around the girl's neck and started choking her. Capsodia noticed in shock that it was a Glapnerus control ring. Such a thing was impossible for a human to wield. The man then stopped hurting the demoness. The girl sat on the floor in tears. Wangud subdued demons with this ring. After using it, they became obedient. The man told Capsodius that he would help the demon queen win, and as a reward, he demanded power. Capsodia immediately decided that they would definitely not be friends with him. However, this was his chance. If everything worked out, he would be able to slip out of the palace during the turmoil. But there was one nuance. The boy asked what would happen to the saint and the heroine. Wangud replied that they were extremely capable and could hinder them. The hero understood this and said that they should be eliminated first. The man rejoiced. But Capsodium had one condition. After the operation was over, they would not have to interfere in each other's affairs because all he wanted was a quiet life. Wangud, with a sly face, agreed, and they shook hands. The celebration began. Capsodia walked in front, Euphemia and Sharon following behind him, all gathered to greet the new heroes. The boy stopped in front of the king and queen. Wangud stood nearby. He and the hero glanced at each other. The king greeted Capsodius and Euphemia. The king's name was Alfred Giga Cantaberia, and the queen's name was Sarasaga Giga Cantaberia. Capsodia never thought the day would come when he would be among humans like this, but he decided to go with the flow for the moment. The king was about to start the ceremony, but he was suddenly interrupted by Wangud. He went in front of the king and said that today's ceremony will not take place. Everyone gathered in the hall was surprised. Mary grudgingly intervened and asked her brother what he meant. The king was also waiting for an explanation as to why they should interrupt such an important event. The man bowed and said that he had doubts about this dedication ceremony. In particular, it concerned the heroes and saints gathered here. Euphemia was in great shock. Maria asked if he realized what he was carrying, because his doubts were misplaced here because both her character and Euphemia were really strong. Wangud did not calm down and said that he had doubts also about his sister Maria. The girl said that he could not hear himself, and before Wangud was a crybaby and a coward, that he was afraid even of her. The man replied that he had no doubt that she was a saint, but sometimes people were blind. He also had no doubt about Mr. Capsodium's strength. However, he asked her a surprising question, why she made a random person a hero. The guy had turned his back on her. People had already really made up their minds that there were plenty of good candidates in the world, but for some reason, she had gotten involved with a stranger. Maria did not answer him. Then Wangud decided to answer for her and told everyone that they were lovers. Capsodia went all droopy and pale. He rushed to stop the man because it was not true, but suddenly Maria intervened. She embarrassedly said that she didn't want to tell her father yet. The king and queen rose from their seats gloomier than a cloud. The mother asked if it was true. The girl lied that she and the hero had decided that they would have 3 children.